you miss me? I've been out of it comatose, but the depression is over.
Hello and welcome to Controlled Burns, the hobby list podcast from me, your host, Andrew Burns, or Slow Burn from Wildfire Gaming. We are on part 6 of our audiobook experiment with Mick Foley's A Tale of Blood and Sweatsocks. And we're going to be starting this section on chapter 32. I'd say we have somewhere between probably 3 parts left to this series. So, hope you're enjoying it. I'm enjoying it, and I'm looking forward to getting back to it. And who matters more than I do when it comes to this podcast? So, just a reminder, normally this is a hobby list podcast. We talk about all things pop culture, entertainment, video games, music, TV and film, books, which we're now going into now. And we've just kind of been taking a hiatus for the audiobooks, but I think it's been an interesting experiment and a challenge. So we're going to get back into it right now with chapter 32 of A Tale of Blood and Sweatsocks by Mick Foley. We arrived back in Atlanta, glad to be home and excited about the holidays. Colette was glad to be home, despite the realization that it signaled the end of her modeling career. Working for Wilhelmina had been exciting, but a real big job hadn't come along yet, and Colette felt that maybe at age 34 the big jobs were over. To this day, she still does some work, but it's mostly for fun. I've always loved the Christmas season. I know most people do, but I look forward to it all year long. In addition to my year-round Christmas music selection, I also keep a Christmas village up in a place of prominence all year long and some painted ceramic Santas as well. My favorite place in the world as a kid was Santa's Village in New Hampshire, where in the summer of 1996 I made my triumphant return after an absence of 27 years. Now it's my kid's favorite place in the world. Guess where we're going? I asked my daughter about 3 months before the trip. Santa Village would come her tiny little 2-year-old reply. It was in the Christmas spirit and in front of the Christmas tree that I cut one of my all-time favorite promos for ECW. My anti-ECW campaign had been a big hit, but I wasn't satisfied. I needed more. I decided that in order for the fans to truly hate me, I had to lose everything about me that they'd ever liked. The look was the first to go. I slicked back my hair real tight into a short conservative look. Then I shaved my beard and mustache for the first time in years. I put on a sports jacket that I bought especially for the occasion and threw on a shirt and tie. I'd always hated people who wore loafers with no socks, so I went with those as well. I also decided to modify my speaking style. Gone was the intensity, the shrieking, and the defiance, and came the nerdy phrases, fake laugh, and utter ass kissing. I realized that this was something ECW fans would hate more than anything. I decided I would put over the fans, the product, and the whole ECW mentality, but do it in a way that was incredibly wimpy. In contrast to my earlier promos, which were hardcore, anti-hardcore messages, these would be namby-pamby pro-hardcore interviews. I set the whole interview against the storyline of Todd Gordon voting for the most hardcore wrestler of 1995, by brown-nosing both Gordon and the fans, while at the same time adding ridiculous imagery to the hardcore mentality and losing my look and voice. I was sure it would gain me the disdain of the fans. It was also the most fun I ever had in front of a camera. My wife filmed it, and if I must say so, did a pretty damn good job. December 1995 ECW TV show A Hardcore Christmas. Scene: the Foley House. As Burl Ives' Holly Jolly Christmas plays in the background, the camera fades in. A sockless loafer is bouncing to the tune of the music as the camera slowly pans out. We see a clean-shaven Cactus Jack sitting in front of a Christmas tree with his 2-year-old daughter Noelle on his lap. The clean-cut cactus speaks. Ho, ho, ho! Happy hardcore holidays, everybody. This is Cactus Jack, along with the rest of the Foleys here, to wish you and your family a happy holiday hardcore season. Noelle laughs. I took this time out today to try to explain what Christmas means to me, and by golly, I found out that Christmas could mean a lot of different things. First off, I found out that Christmas can be fun. Haha, Noelle laughs. Why, just the other day, there were some Christmas carolers, and I snuck up on their little group, and as the door opened and they began to sing, I started chanting, ECW, ECW, ECW. And I'll tell you what, I would have gotten away with it too, but all the neighbors heard me yelling, bang, bang, Noelle laughs, as I made my way through the neighborhood. But they didn't care. They just thought, there goes that nutty Cactus Jack. But do you know what? They realized that it doesn't hurt to have a hardcore person in the neighborhood. Second of all, getting serious, Christmas is for family. Why, just the other day I was taking gingerbread men out of the oven, getting happier, and I'll tell you what, I took one look at that cookie sheet and I was wishing I could powie hit someone over the head with it. Right in the kisser. I bet you could get some juice out of that one. Bang bang. Most important, Christmas is for caring, real serious. Now, I understand that there's a hardcore balloting going on and that Todd Gordon is in charge of the voting, but more importantly, Todd is in charge of some very prestigious and worthwhile children's charities, and I'd like to be the first at this special time of the year to write a generous check. Seeing as I don't know the exact names of the charities, I'm just going to make the check out to Todd Gordon himself, and winking at camera, I think Todd will know what to do with it. Here, honey, zoom in so they can get a look at all these zeros. Not too close so they'll see our address, and we're liable to have 1,500 hardcore fans on our front lawn chanting, "He's hardcore! He's hardcore!" I'll tell you what, I love them, and if it were up to me, I'd have them all in for a cup of hot chocolate. Oh, Santa, picking up a plush Santa doll, what's the number one wrestling organization? Horrible ventriloquist act. ECW! Ho ho! ECW! Camera fades out as Noel cries for Mama, Mama, Mama. I left for Japan right after New Year's, but not before doing some 10-second promos to introduce Mankind to the audience. They were just brief sound bites, and because my mask was still undergoing final preparations, the camera really never showed my face, but would instead feature an extreme close up of my ear or mouth. On that evening in Stamford, Have a Nice Day was born. I actually came back without a scratch on that tour, although I had a hard time trying to convince Colette of that during my traditional post tour phone call. Upon my return to the States, I headed to Queens for ECW's debut in the New York area. My beard had grown in a little bit, and despite my different look and ridiculous promos, I still received a hell of a reaction from my hometown fans as I battled Sabu in a tremendous contest. For some reason, the building was demanding a 50% concession fee for any items sold, which I protested immediately. Instead of letting these people whom I'd never met walk away with my money, I had my t-shirt maker hawk them in the parking lot. He came back excited as hell less than 20 minutes later. "We sold them all," he yelled. "Cactus. No matter what, they still love you." On that same night, Mikey Whipwreck won a strange stipulation match that, although wrestled as a single, allowed him to take possession of both tag team belts. Mikey was then, in theory, allowed to pick his own partner to be tag champs with, but in reality, I immediately ran to the ring, hugged him, and accepted the belt. Mikey and I were now two-time tag team champions, although Mikey would spend the next several weeks wanting out of our partnership. A week later, my little World Wrestling Federation video spot started airing, and everything changed. When we returned to Queens, I sent my t-shirt guy out into the street and waited anxiously for all that extra shirt money to jam my pockets. A few minutes later, he returned out of breath with his arms still full of wanted shirts. There were at least 4 visible loogies on his jacket from where he'd been spit on. "They hate you out there," he cried. "I had to get out of there. I thought they might kill me." Sure enough, the crowd was hot when I hit the ring with Mikey to defend the belts. I added to the heat by sporting a takeoff on the popular ECF&W shirt that read WWF and F. We lost the belts that night, and I turned on poor Mikey, who had just wrestled his heart out, further cementing my new image as a sellout and a scumbag. As a matter of fact, I was showered by chants of "You sold out! You sold out!" on my way to the ring. I stepped back in and addressed the chant. "You know, you people are a lot smarter than I give you credit for," I said, "because I have a feeling that a year from now I'm going to have to look in the mirror and admit in my heart that I sold out." The crowd was quiet now as they took in my impromptu confession. Then I continued with a sarcastic yell. "I sold out the Garden, I sold out the Coliseum, I sold out every damn arena in this country." The next day I arrived an hour late at the ECW arena as I had been at the wedding of my old school buddy Scott Darragh. When I got there, my opponent Shane Douglas, who was making his return to ECW after a disastrous run in the World Wrestling Federation, was irate. Apparently, Shane's return to the ECW arena had not been warmly received, and he was concerned that he would be booed out of the place against Cactus Jack. "Don't worry," I assured him, "because these people will hate me, and besides, I've got a plan." I showed up for my match, teetering slowly and still dressed in my wedding suit. "I've got some good news and some bad news," I alerted the crowd, which wasn't quite sure where I might be going with this. "The good news is I was at a wedding, and it was beautiful, and I drove back here without any harm to myself or others. The bad news is, in all the merriment, I had a little too much to drink, and I don't feel that I can, in good conscience, subject any of you to my drunken, irresponsible ways. Now, how about somebody throwing me a fucking beer?" With that, Shane hit the ring and interrupted my little post-nuptial cocktail. We went at it, and a hell of a match ensued. For a reason that was never quite explained, Brian Hildebrand was our referee, and for a reason that also went unknown, my old friend handcuffed my hands behind my back when I was down. When I got up, Shane had a chair and began teeing off on my unprotected skull, an idea we would later use in the 1999 Royal Rumble. After every shot, he'd grab the mic and try to get me to denounce the World Wrestling Federation. I wouldn't do it. Finally, after I'd taken more punishment than anyone ever ought to, he put a mic in front of my mouth and demanded a denouncement. "Mikey!" was what I screamed. Another chance. Another "Mikey!" Shane then hooked on a figure 4 leg lock as I screamed in vain for my little buddy. Finally, Mikey arrived, armed with a chair that I was sure would free me from the figure four. Instead, Mikey faked right and went left and caught me with a brutal shot to the forehead and nose that resulted in a 3 count. A match with Mikey was booked for my final ECW performance in March of 1996 at the ECW Arena. Before I started with the Federation, I had one more tour of Japan to complete. Before I left, I went back to Stanford, where on a showy afternoon, I participated in 4 vignettes that I was sure were going to propel me to the forefront of the company and Vince's heart. I left the studio that day sure that I'd hit a home run. Everyone there, including Jim Cornette, thought so too. The vignettes were filmed in front of a makeshift dungeon and featured me playing with rats and telling stories of piano playing, child abuse, neglect, and disfigurement. I had been reading books like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and was full of antisocial images. This wasn't as good as Cactus Jack's stuff, I thought, as I pulled out of the Federation parking lot. It's better. I returned from Japan and after a few days flew to New York for my final ECW shows. My opponent for the first show in Queens was Chris Jericho. I had met Jericho in Japan and thought he was a hell of a lot of potential, but not just as a wrestler because he was already damn good, but as a personality as well. I had been after Paul Lee literally for months about giving him a try, and he had finally given in. The response to me was brutal, even to the point of hurting my feelings. Even though I'd been doing my best to piss these people off for the last several months, I wanted to feel like they could at least separate fact from fantasy and give me a decent send-off. Instead, they showered me with everything from full beers to deafening chants of "you sold out." That's a chant that has always disturbed me. It reminded me of when the bratty little kid on One Day at a Time accuses Schneider, the custodian, of selling out for taking a better job. I didn't buy it then, and I still don't. I mean, it's not as if these fans were taking up collections for ECW wrestlers' retirement funds or taking care of my mortgage. Even after the match, when I did my today day, I feel like the luckiest man on the face of the earth. Earth. Lou Gehrig's speech. The crowd was unforgiving. It was definitely one of those nights when I went to sleep thinking that this whole wrestling thing wasn't worth it. I wondered if my farewell in the ECW arena, where I had sacrificed so much, would be any different. I hoped so, but I doubted it. I had made that particular group of fans a direct target of my wrath and doubted they had forgiven me for it. I had made up special commemorative t-shirts for my finale. The front was an illustration that a fan had sent me depicting a somewhat pained-looking Cactus Jack bound by barbed wire to a cactus as buzzards flew overhead. It did look somewhat Christ-like, but I rationalized it enough to avoid feeling like a total blasphemer. Well, I was on a cactus, not a cross, and was being held there by barbed wire, not nails. Besides, I'm a lot heavier than Jesus ever was. Underneath the illustration, these shirts had simple words: Cactus Jack, 1985 to 1996. The shirts had done well in Japan, and even though I wasn't expecting many to sell in the States, at least they were there for anyone who wanted to commemorate Cactus Jack's last match. My promos to build up the match had been something of a departure for me. I had already condemned, criticized, kissed ass, and made fun. Now it was time for something completely different. The completely irrational interviews. I picked out the tiniest detail and lambasted Mikey about it. I blamed him for leaving Doritos in the car by screaming, "Good God, man! Don't you know I have an eating disorder?" I also criticized his lack of appreciation for the beauty of fall foliage. Last but not least, I tore into him for replacing my soothing Leonard Cohen tape with satanic heavy metal music, for crying out loud. I'm the father of 2 impressionable children, you sinner. For his part, Mikey just acted completely flabbergasted. I was thinking of 2 reasons for this rather odd take on our feud. One, anyone can get mad about major things, but it takes a dangerous man to get worked up about the changing of the leaves. And two, no matter what I talked about, the building was going to sell out anyway. Why not have some fun? The next night, I heard Mikey's music playing and my mind began to race. I thought about where I'd been and where I was heading. I know that I'd worked my ass off on both sides of the Pacific, but I also knew that I'd been a big fish in a small pond there. The World Wrestling Federation was the great unknown, and I had an 8 o'clock flight to Corpus Christi, Texas the next day to give Mankind a test run in front of the Federation fans. It would not be televised, but instead used as a dress rehearsal before my big debut. I had always hated wearing a mask and doubted that this would be any different. I liked being Cactus Jack, but after tonight, I never would be again. I wanted to make this last match count. Crash! I heard the cymbal. Then the familiar guitar riff. John Kay's voice kicked in, and I knew that it was time to go. Get your motor running, and out on the highway. I stepped through the curtain. I was not mentally prepared for the reaction I received. I couldn't have expected it in my wildest dreams. Fans were clapping, and by the time I got to the ring, every last one was on his feet, chanting my name in unison. Cactus Jack! Cactus Jack! It wasn't the loudest reaction I'd ever heard for a wrestler, but it was damn close. What set it apart was that it was so real. It wasn't born out of pandemonium, angles, marketing, or hoopla. It was born out of a genuine respect and appreciation, and it blew me away. I had my head down because I knew that if I looked up, I'd surely cry. I came real close. But I was moved beyond all description. I was moved when I saw it on tape, and I'm moved right now while I'm writing it. I could not possibly have asked for a better going away present. I had launched verbal assaults at these people for over 6 months, and in the end, it turned out that they liked me. They really liked me. The match was one of my all-time favorites. Poor Mikey took a hell of a beating, but kept coming back. I backdropped a charging Mikey and then back suplexed him into a table I had leaned against the ring post. I worked him over and used a fan named John Owen's crutch to give him a nice shot to the gut. I even premiered the mandible claw, which unfortunately was met with silence. Somewhere along the way, Mikey took over and used a variety of interesting implements, including the Sacred Cohen album I referred to earlier. Actually, I held on to the ancient vinyl disc like Linus holds onto his blanket while Mikey continued his assault. While holding the album, I staggered through the crowd until Mikey suplexed me at the base of the ramp. When I slowly stood, Mikey ascended to the top of the stage, which was some 12 feet off the floor. With a leap, Mikey became airborne and caught me with a variation of a flying cross body block. I actually lowered my head and caught much of his impact with my head in his chest, which could have been bad news for both of us. Fortunately, we were both okay, and we made our way back through the crowd, at which point Mikey rolled me into the ring. He followed me in with one of the gray plastic ringside chairs and caught me with 3 good shots that sent me down for a close 2.5 count. Mikey then took to the top rope and attempted a somersault dive, which I avoided. Now it was my turn. I took the chair and turned it around. I always felt that by using the reverse side and by making contact with the backrest portion as opposed to the seat itself, the blow was more impressive. It allowed me greater extension and increased force, and the result was more of a loud crack as opposed to a dull thud. I came down hard across Mikey's back with the first one. Crack! The crowd felt it then. Another one even harder than the first. Crack! Mikey was wriggling in pain. I then put the chair down and waited for young Mikey to get up. When he arose, I tucked his head between my legs, grabbed the back of his tights, and then pile drove him on the chair with a quick stump pulling motion. 1, 2, 3, and the Cactus Jack era was over. The crowd rose to their feet and began clapping vigorously. Again, it wasn't pandemonium reigning, but a legitimate display of gratitude. I picked up Mikey and hugged him before raising his hand. Joey Styles made a great call on the television broadcast. This is the Cactus Jack that we want to remember. This is the Cactus Jack that we love. The crowd's reaction had me close to tears again as I grabbed the house mic. The match had been very memorable, but the post-match shenanigans would be just as good. This is one screwed up place, is how I started my farewell speech. To give me this type of reaction after all the things I've said about you makes it all worth it. I looked down and saw my friend, who was always willing to lend his trusty crutch, John Owen. I stepped out of the ring and took off my new cactus t-shirt. When I handed it to him, he hugged me tight and wouldn't let me go. I tried to pull away, but he had a hell of a grip. I looked at his face, and I could see tears streaming down it. He was embarrassed by his show of emotion. I gently assured him that it was okay and climbed back into the ring. I then continued. There are 2 guys that I have to mention here by name because without them there would be no more ECW. One of them is a business visionary who knew what he wanted and went about creating ECW. The other is a creative genius. I could hear people yelling at Todd Gordon and Paul E. by name. I want to bring them out for you right now. Dancing Stevie Richards and the Blue Meanie. Meanie and Richards, who were kind of like comedic heels for the company, came running out, pumping their arms in the air and jumping around like little kids. We hugged in mid-ring, and the music-only version of New York, New York began to play. To understand the significance of New York, New York, you have to understand the wrestling industry's habit of referring to every wrestling promotion by its nearest major city. A wrestler going to work in the world-class group would say, I'm going to Dallas, and a wrestler heading for WCW would say, I'm going to Atlanta. Even though the World Wrestling Federation was located in Stamford, it had always been known as New York. The packed house picked up on it right away and actually started singing the words as I did a terrible Rockettes quickline routine with my 2 cronies. After the music died down, I got on the mic again and said that as a last request, I wanted to strut out of the ECW arena. So as Stevie Richards' music kicked in, I did the worst Fargo strut in history, all the way up the aisle and out of the ECW arena. I believe it was the greatest wrestling send-off I had ever seen. The next morning, I flew to Corpus Christi, Texas for my first match as Mankind. Chapter 33. I was nervous and deprived of sleep on my way to Corpus Christi. It just seemed like such a big, scary world in the World Wrestling Federation. 2 of their stars had just signed big money contracts with WCW, which had begun trying to win the wrestling war in earnest. WCW's Monday Nitro was heavily promoted on their television stations, and the show had been running neck and neck with the World Wrestling Federation's Raw. Nobody knew what type of impact the departures of Kevin Nash and Scott Hall would have, but it had created a poor feeling among the wrestlers. I looked at my booking sheet and realized I knew at least two-thirds of the guys already, but it still had great apprehension about the coming day. I arrived at the building early and ran into my old WCW teammate Jake the Snake. Jake was a part of the creative process. He was on the booking committee, in addition to being a wrestler. We caught up on old times before Jake went back to his hotel and slept through the entire TV taping. As other wrestlers arrived, I met and spoke with people I'd never met and BS'd a little with the guys I did know. I saw Jim Cornette and ran over to talk about my vignettes, which had already begun airing. Jimmy, I called, suddenly feeling refreshed at the prospect of the glowing words he would no doubt be sending my way. What did Vince think? I asked. Well, he started. Everybody from TV director Kevin Dunn to TV writer Vince Russo loved it. They can't stop talking about it. That was nice to know, but I was more interested in what the Big Cheese thought. What about Vince? What did he think? Jimmy was thinking, and I knew this was trouble. It was the same feeling I'd had when I talked to Neil Pruitt about my Cleveland vignettes. Jimmy's words did little to assuage me. I'm not sure Vince understood them, he sadly stated. I was really confused. Vince had told me he loved my Cactus Jack interviews, and these were not all that different. I told this to Corny, and he had to stop and think some more. Not a good sign coming from a man who was one of the greatest speakers in the business. Cactus, I'm not sure that Vince has ever seen your interviews. Oh man, it was hard to get happy after that. Corny continued his gentle assault on my ego and confidence by saying, Vince is really too busy to watch matches from Japan and interviews from ECW. The reason he told you your promos were great is that we told them they were. He could see that his words had staggered me and was quick to try to straighten me out. Look, Cactus, don't let that bore you. Once Vince sees you and gets to know you, he'll be your biggest fan of all. I left our conversation feeling as if I'd just watched 3 Al Snow matches. I actually dozed off a few times during the evening. This was back in the days when they used to tape 4 one-hour shows in one night, and the tapings had a tendency to burn out an audience. Steve Austin had just become stone cold and was featured in every single taping. By the time I made my Mankind debut, most of the fans no longer wanted to be there. I was sent through the curtain to the accompaniment of a somber-sounding dirge, which I later found out was called Ode to Freud. I listened to Howard Finkel as he made the announcement. Coming down the aisle, at a weight of 287 pounds, Mankind. Hey, there was a surprise. Not only did they go with Mankind, they had also shelved the Mutilator. To say that my reaction was lukewarm would be generous. As I stumbled to the ring, trying to look like a psychologically abused former piano player, I couldn't help but think about what a difference a day made, from the height of popularity to the depths of apathy, all within 24 hours. A few people called out Cactus Jack. The rest just stared. Wrestling audiences can be fickle, and they don't always have a great appreciation for the past. Also, the World Wrestling Federation audience in March 1996 were not the same people who were by and large watching WCW in September 1994, when I'd last been featured nationally. I had an untelevised match with Aldo Montoya that night and got the win when my claw pierced the defenses of his yellow jockstrap mask. As the bell rang, I heard something comforting. It was beautiful piano music, just as I had asked for in Vince's office. I hadn't wanted to believe too much of what I'd heard, but Vince McMahon was sure proving to be a man of his word, even if he didn't really know much about me. I called home after my match. It was not exactly a buzz over my future as Mankind. My mask especially was a subject that bothered me. It was hot, moved around when I worked, and was tough to breathe in. Maybe I can just wear it for a few months, I said to Colette. Maybe then they can do an angle and I can just lose the mask and be myself. Ironically, I'd be given the choice to do that just 2.5 years later and would turn it down. I came back for the next set of TV tapings in California at the end of March. The tapings would take place after WrestleMania, which was the biggest show of the year. As was tradition, all the boys arrived a few days early to help promote the show and bask in the hoopla. As a masked wrestler who had not even officially started yet, I was unable to take part in either the promoting or the basking. Instead, for 3 days, I sat in my room at the Hilton, the World Wrestling Federation springs once a year for WrestleMania week, and looked out across the parking lot at Disneyland. I could see Matterhorn Mountain beckoning me with its majestic, snow-covered peaks, and I grew weaker by the day. Finally, I couldn't take it, and on Saturday, March 30th, during the peak of spring break, I took the solitary walk across the street and stepped into the hallowed haven of Disneyland. The place was packed to capacity, to the point where I didn't even consider getting on a line, but worse than that, I had an unbelievable sense of guilt. I felt like an adulterer, except I was cheating on both my wife and my kids, and I couldn't take it. I called home and confessed my sins and was immediately forgiven. I came back later that night and actually did go on a few rides. I sat through Mania the next day and got ready to go to San Bernardino when Vader, my nose-bleeding, eyebrow-busting friend from my past, yelled, "Hey, Cactus! I've got a caddy and trans is free. I'm just looking for a bit of company. What do you think?" A free caddy was nothing to sneeze at, so I accepted his offer. I was sitting in the caddy taking in all the plush amenities that were somewhat lacking in my Lumina when Leon handed me his hotel bill and his sunglasses. Hold on to this, he grumbled as he walked away to grab his luggage. With all but the incidentals such as food and phone paid for, I figured his bill would be somewhat low. I mean, after all, how much can one man eat and talk in 3 days? My bill was $48. I turned over Vader's bill and glanced at the numbers. I couldn't have been more surprised if I had discovered 32 body in John Wayne Gacy's crawl space. The figure was astronomical, 2,500 big ones. There were $100 meals and $200 bar bills, $50 tips, and $300 sunglasses. I asked him about it, and he seemed nonchalant. Is that more than you spend? He asked. I got the feeling right then that this Vader/Mankind union wasn't going to last. You would think that two men who shared the intimate bond of beating the crap out of each other would know each other a little better, wouldn't you? I was nervous about TV, knowing that this one day could mean the difference between success and failure in the World Wrestling Federation. In my years in the business, I had often seen talented guys screw up once and never get a second chance. I really didn't want to be one of those guys. I was scheduled for a match against Bob Halley, a tough former race car driver from Mobile who hadn't had any victories in a while. I know most guys' mentality when it comes to a new guy, and I knew that there was a good chance that Bob wouldn't want an ECW guy to look good at his expense. As it turned out, there was no incident, as Bob did his job, and I picked up my victory. I can't claim that the victory was memorable, as I was trying to iron the wrinkles out of a new style, but the episode to follow certainly was. The Undertaker had a scheduled match against Justin Bradshaw, who would later become one of his acolytes, or followers. I watched with anticipation, waiting for a tombstone piledriver. When I saw it happening, I felt my body tense. Thud. Undertaker dropped Bradshaw's inverted body on his head. The referee bent to count, but I was already on my way. 1, 2, I broke up the count with a forearm across the back and sent the Undertaker to the steel steps, which he hit with the upper part of his thighs, sending him spinning over the top. I climbed the ring apron, measured my opponent, and took off. The footage of the diving elbow would be shown countless times as my feud with the Undertaker had just taken off. I then backed off and waited for the Taker to stand before sinking in the mandible claw. I had performed for less than 2 minutes, but I was completely exhausted. When I got to the backstage area, I was literally gasping for breath. More important than my nerves was the fact that we had just done some captivating television. A few days later, DDP, my old WCW buddy, called to say, "Bro, I'm telling you, I even told Bish, that thing's gonna draw." Also of interest on this taping was that it was Mark Marrow's first taping. Unlike me, Marrow had come to the World Wrestling Federation with considerably more than just the promise of an opportunity. This fact would both annoy me and drive me over the next several months. Mark's actually a decent guy who at one time was a good friend of mine, but business is business, and the fact is that Marrow didn't draw. He sure did know how to make money, though. After the taping, I rode with Vader to San Diego. Vader had broken his eardrum during the evening and asked me to drive. I was happy to, as Vader could quite possibly have been the worst driver in the business. He would look at you while he drove and was quite fond of physically going over his matches in the car. I'd go boom, 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 he'd say, all the while throwing forearms at me that, although slow, would still connect. He was also the worst car singer I'd ever heard. Everyone sings in the car, but Leon actually thought he was good. He'd close his eyes, lean his head back, and proceed to ruin songs that I had grown up loving. I still can't bring myself to listen to Cat Stevens' Wild World to this very day. "Who sings this?" I'd always ask Leon as he started to butcher a popular recording. "The Beatles," he'd reply, or the name of whatever group happened to be singing at the time. "Let's just keep it that way," I would admonish him, although my remarks never did stop his lyrical rampage. My main concern about Vader, however, was financial. That $2,500 tab he'd built up was still fresh in my mind as we headed for San Diego. I was compulsive about saving money in those days, especially because I had no idea how much of it I was going to make. I knew that to save money on the road, I was going to have to split rooms, but I had heard that Vader liked to have his own room at Marriott's around the country. This flew in the face of everything I had been brought up to believe. Going back to the days when we used to jam 8 people in a room to see Springsteen, I had always split rooms. But with Vader, I was starting to have my doubts. By the time we arrived at the San Diego Marriott, Vader had his shirt off with potato chip debris all tangled up in his chest hair. He had been drinking and mumbling his words while alternating gaseous emissions between his mouth and his ass. I had to speak up, money or no money. "Leon, you usually like to get your own room, don't you?" I asked. Leon didn't answer but nodded his head and burped. "Me too," I said, while thinking of the sanctity of my own private bedroom. Actually, I've lightened up quite a bit in my money-saving obsession over the years and will often spring for my own hotel and car. With wrestling as popular as it is, it seemed like a pretty good investment in myself to get a good night's sleep. I will not, however, under any circumstances, pay more than $80 for a hotel room. Most of the time, I try to stay in the $50 range. The only time I'll make an exception is when my family travels with me. This sudden transformation didn't happen overnight, as I bounced around with different travel mates over the next 3 years. Al Snow and Marty Jannetty were the first guys I hooked up with after my driving divorce from the man they call Vader. Marty had at one time been one of the hottest prospects and best young wrestlers in the business, but his love for the nightlife and a tendency to get himself in trouble had led to various hirings and firings, each of which resulted in a smaller role in the company. Marty's role at this point in 1996 was his smallest ever, as half of the New Rockers tag team along with Al Snow. At this point, Al had been forced to change his name to Leaf Cassidy, a combination of two 70s heartthrobs. At one time, with Shawn Michaels as his partner, Marty had been a part of some of the World Wrestling Federation's greatest matches. Michaels had gone on to be one of the Federation's biggest superstars, while Jannetty seemed to drift aimlessly. His only joy in life, it seemed, was tormenting poor Al. He would ride Al at any opportunity. When Al was in a public toilet, Marty would wad up wet paper towels and throw them at him. When he was in the shower, Marty would throw cold water on him. He would put pitchers of water on top of doors and tilt garbage cans in front of them. Life was never dull when Marty was around. He was funny, too. One time, while driving back to Montreal, he had us laughing so hard with Vern Gagne stories that we had to pull the car over to keep from crashing. Vern Gagne was an old-time wrestler and promoter who, like a lot of old-timers, didn't care for modern-day wrestling. He also promoted the Minneapolis area, which prided itself on its technical wrestling emphasis. By doing a dead-on Vern impression and substituting the word fuck for wrestle, Marty had us on the verge of crying. Jesus Christ, kid, where'd you learn how to fuck? Not in this territory, because in this territory, fucking comes first. Back in my day, kid, we knew how to fuck. After all, that's what the name on the marquee says. Fucking. Al is one of my favorites to ride with. I know that I've poked fun at Al several times in this book, but it's not out of any malice toward the Crown Prince of Hardcore, but rather the continuation of a long-standing tradition of insulting each other. The insults actually started out innocently, but soon came to be judged in much the same way a boxing match is. A decent joke was considered a jab, a good quality joke a straight right, and the big daddy of all insults would result in a knockout. Knockouts were rare, but in all honesty, I scored them much more frequently than Al could ever have hoped to. Throwing in the false accusation of homosexuality was also highly valued in our contest. In fact, for quite a while, it dominated the competition. For example, when I was in the midst of a series of matches with Austin, I would tell Al, "Hey, it's probably unfair that I get all the title shots with Steve, so I'll tell you what. Tonight I'm going to let you go a couple of rounds with my bald-headed champion." Definite knockout. Part of the rules were no bodily action or orifice could be referred to by a vulgar or offensive word. It just showed a lack of imagination. Bob Holly was actually disqualified for his lack of ingenuity. I mean, why use a common word like cock when I could tell Al to go fish for my one-eyed, blue-veined, purple-headed trouser trout instead? As it turned out, a road trip with Al and me could be pretty overwhelming. After 5 days in Canada, too hot Scott Taylor returned home to his wife, who asked him how he'd enjoyed traveling with us. It was fine, he told her, except all they talked about was hammering each other. Scott was not the only one who stopped riding with us after one road trip. After a while, I was able to use a valuable weapon, the fake laugh. We began to take our feud public, and the fake laugh buried Al. I would tell a joke, and it would be met with howls of fake laughter, while Al's attempts were met with total silence. "I hate you," is all he could manage to say before leaving, a defeated man. When I combined the fake laugh with the growing influence of the internet, the knockout ratio really started to explode. If I saw the roving camera they used for the World Wrestling Federation internet show during lunch, Al was as good as done. "What's the difference between me and Jack in the Box?" was the lead-in to just one of my verbal knockouts. "Well," I answered, "Jack in the Box serves up a jumbo jack between two buns, and I serve up Cactus Jack between Al Snow's buns." Oh ho 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 ho! Big group laugh. It was a beautiful part of my life, but like many things in life, I took it too far. Al was a remarkably good sport about all this until I overstepped the boundaries of fair play and took my brutal power and displayed it on national television. First, on a pre-WrestleMania party where I told the audience that in addition to visiting the Liberty Bell and seeing the original Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia, I also went to a very small museum where, up on the third floor, under heavy security, I had found a very rare tape of Al Snow's last good match. A few weeks later, I upped the ante with a knockout so stunning it made Butterbean Bart Gunn look like a 15-round technical battle, which it was not. Al felt like he was under pressure to retaliate and nearly ruined his career by launching a 5-minute verbal assault on Mankind while doing guest commentary on the next evening's Raw. Besides the fact that it was both unfunny and unimaginative, Vince had personally hated it, and as a result, I felt the need to apologize. "Vince, I'm sorry that I used your show as a forum to push my little rip with Al. It was unprofessional and I apologize." Vince then hit me with words I never expected to hear. "Mick, I don't mind when you do it, but Al ruined an entire segment by talking about you. I basically had carte blanche from the boss to ruin Al, to embarrass him and make him suffer. I don't think I will, but it's nice to know I can. Oh, by the way, I invented the whole head thing." Heading into June, Mankind was gaining momentum. The office had pushed me hard, and people were responding. I was getting a chance to cut some pretty decent interviews, and my matches with Undertaker had been stealing the show around the country. I sometimes think about where my life would be if The Undertaker had chosen to be an asshole. I had seen guys put a wrestler in a hole that can be damn tough to dig out of. Shane Douglas had been living proof. He'd come to World Wrestling Federation with huge hopes and had been miserable right off the bat. His lame Dean gimmick didn't help, but neither did opponents who went out of their way to make him look bad. Undertaker had been completely the opposite. His professionalism had been beyond reproach, and as a result, both of our careers had benefited. I arrived in Milwaukee for the King of the Ring pay-per-view, not knowing what to expect. I was hoping for a continuation of the quality work we had put out, but beyond that, I really had no idea. Shane Douglas had been real critical of my decision to join the World Wrestling Federation and didn't seem impressed when I told him of my imminent feud with Taker. When push comes to shove, Cactus, he had warned me, whose shoulders do you think are going to be on the mat? Well, Shane, in this case, they weren't mine, and what had to be considered a major upset, Mankind cleanly defeated The Undertaker in 17 minutes of one hell of a match. I think this match was actually a corner turner for the Federation, as it applied liberal use of chairs and outside the ring brawling that actually enhanced the rivalry instead of blowing it off. The match also featured the amusing guest commentary of Owen Hart. I've been trying to think of the best time to speak about Owen. As I write this, it has been 8 days since his tragic death in Kansas City. I've been writing every night, usually between the hours of 10 p.m. and 4 a.m., and often when I put my pen down, it seems for a few fleeting seconds that the whole thing was a bad dream. Unfortunately, it wasn't, and I usually walk over to a photograph of me, Owen, and Terry Funk and say a prayer for Owen and his family. I am, as of this writing, on a plane from Calgary, where earlier today I attended Owen's funeral. I told a story on Raw a week ago about how my son felt so proud to look like Owen Hart after they had both gotten matching crew cuts 3 years ago. Dad, guess what? Dewey had asked me during a long-distance phone call. I look like Owen Hart. Colette got on the phone and said, "Your son is so happy to look like Owen." I went on to say that I would be proud if my son could grow up to be a man like Owen. Several of the Hart family mentioned how touched they were by my words, as they knew they had come from my heart. I had the privilege of meeting Owen's wife, Martha, and she told me how much Owen had thought of me and how I was one of his favorite people. I will always treasure that brief meeting with Owen's wife and will truly hold my kind words within my heart, her kind words within my heart for the rest of my life. Owen was an excellent wrestler. He had won an athletic scholarship to the University of Calgary as an amateur wrestler, where he went on to compete in the Canadian National Championships. He left after 3 years to compete for his father Stu's Stampede Wrestling Company. Stu himself was a legendary wrestler, but was perhaps even better known for training wrestlers in his basement dungeon, where screams of pain were as much a part of the home as the furniture. Owen was at one point the greatest flyer in North America, and with his added knowledge of amateur wrestling and Stu's dungeon know-how, was one of the best all-around wrestlers in the world. Even after injuries grounded his aerial skills, he went on to be a big star in the World Wrestling Federation, where he was a 4-time tag champ, 2-time Intercontinental champ, and European champion as well. I'd watched Owen for years before meeting him and had been greatly entertained by many of his classic matches. Little did I know upon meeting him that I would enjoy his bad matches even more. I'd been with the Federation only a few months when we came to Scranton, Pennsylvania. We were working at the Catholic Youth Center, which is a great building for atmosphere, but a terrible building for morale because of the low payoffs that the tiny gym always resulted in. It was a little hallway by the wrestler's entrance where you could see the action, so I walked out to take a look. Owen was in the middle of a match with Mark Marrow and had just shot the Wild Man into the ropes. Marrow hit Owen with a shoulder tackle, and instead of taking a crisp, flat back fall, which is the norm, Owen slowly fell as if he were a tree. Man, that's terrible, I thought, especially for someone as good as Owen Hart. It got worse. Marrow shot Owen into the ropes and prepared for a hip toss. Owen took off across the ring using 3 giant, slow, high steps and then took a hip toss, which could more accurately have been called an ankle roll. It was horrible. I was in the middle of thinking, man, maybe he's having a bad night, when I heard the British Bulldog laughing. "Look at Owen! Look at Owen!" Bulldog hooted in his thick English accent. "Oh, that's too much. That's too fucking much." Now I understood. Owen was definitely stinking up the place, but he was doing it on purpose. I had done that a few times myself, but unlike me, Owen wasn't doing it as part of a storyline or to anger the fans. He was doing it simply to amuse the boys. There was nothing like a bad Owen Hart match. The strange thing is, most fans didn't pick up on it. He was subtle enough about it that only the other wrestlers knew. Sometimes, however, when I was actually a part of these hideous performances, it seemed like the whole world could tell. In addition to an offense consisting of multiple rakes of the body, kicks in the ass, horrible-looking karate chops that were always preceded by a loud hi-ya, and cocoa butts, the big fake-looking version of the popular headbutt, so fake that they made Lou Albano look like the Carl Gotch, and he was equally terrible on the defensive. For example, a few months later in Kuwait, I was teaming up with Owen and Bulldog against The Undertaker, Barry Windham, and Owen's brother Bret Hitman Hart. Barry had Owen in a rear chinlock and was really arching up on it. I didn't hear anything of it until heard Bulldog's familiar cry, "Look at Owen! Look at Owen!" I did indeed look at Owen and immediately began laughing. While Barry was going through a series of grimaces and growls to accentuate his hold, Owen's face was completely motionless. He wore not the slightest facial expression, and his body moved not a bit until he casually lifted his arm to smoke an imaginary cigarette. He's too much. He's too fucking much, the Bulldog said, laughing. I had to agree. Later in the match, Bret was tagged in and made a comeback that culminated in his sharpshooter submission hold. The sharpshooter is a legitimately painful hold that places a great deal of stress on the lower back and quadriceps, but if Owen was in pain, he certainly wasn't showing it. As Bret cinched up on the hold, Owen, who had his head facing away from Bret, looked to be in about as much pain as a clam in deep sand. He rubbed his eyes sleepily and checked his wrist for an imaginary watch. Bret cinched up further, and Owen yawned. Finally, Bret rocked back even further and only finally yelled out in pain, but Owen had pleased his biggest admirer. "Oh, that's too fucking much," Bulldog repeated. I was reminded of just how much Davy Boy Smith, Bulldog, had revered Owen when my son rented a video of the 1996 Slammy Awards, the World Wrestling Federation's annual awards show. Owen had won a Slammy the year before and had carried it with him to every match. His tights were adorned with the word Slammy Award winner, and he was even introduced for his matches as the Slammy Award winning Owen Hart. Now, a year later, Owen was not even mentioned, and I felt a little sad to see one of my favorite gimmicks ended. The nominees for Best Bow Tie, a prestigious award if ever there was one, were announced, but before a winner could be declared, Owen jumped on stage. "Yes!" he yelled in his overbearing little way. "I did it! I won! I'm a winner! Woo! Bulldog, you have 2 titles, but you don't have 2 Slammies, but I do because I'm a winner! Woo!" The camera showed Davy Boy, who was literally beaming. He always got the biggest kick out of Owen. Owen continued his little speech threatening Vader and me, who would be facing Owen and Bulldog in the next evening's WrestleMania. As he stepped off stage with his new Slammy in hand, he walked toward Vader. A waiter happened to be passing by, and Owen dumped the entire contents of his tray, 10 pitchers of iced tea, onto Leon. Vader stood up, not knowing what to do. He was smiling, but he sure as hell wasn't happy. Finally, he ran after the 2-time Slammy winner, but tripped and fell, and actually missed a few shows due to injury. I had heard of Owen's reputation as a ribber, but couldn't appreciate it until I saw him in action. We were in Colorado in July 1996. Business had been up, but this particular crowd was uncharacteristically small. I felt like part of the reason was the show's promoter, a likable but somewhat goofy looking cowboy who seemed content not to hang out with the guys, good house or not, or just to hang out with them. Midway through the card, I looked at Owen and saw him wearing headphones and yelling into the accompanying microphone. "Do it!" Owen yelled. "Just do it!" I saw Owen listen, and then he yelled some more. "I don't care if there's a match going on. I'm the promoter, and I say play the damn music now." This was vintage Owen, attempting to get the sound guy to play the wrong music at inappropriate times. Except not only was this sound guy not cooperating, he was getting hot. But this just made Owen happy. He loved the challenge. "Oh yeah? Well, come on down, tough guy. I won't be hard to find. I've got a big cowboy hat and a pair of cowboy boots that I'll stick right up your ass. Oh yeah, come on down, you big bastard, so I can smash my big ass belt buckle right over your head." I looked over and saw a man who looked exactly like the man that Owen had just described. Same hat, same boots, same big-ass belt buckle. It was the affable promoter, grinning goofily, without a clue that Owen Hart was attempting to arrange an impromptu meeting between him and an angry sound man. Sometimes Owen's ribs didn't seem so funny at the time. We were in the middle of a 10-day tour in the summer of 1997 and were touching down in St. John's, Newfoundland. Because this was not a usual Federation stop, we were met at the airport baggage claim by a number of fans. One of them had a camcorder, and I could see on this video screen that he was zooming in on fellow wrestler China's breasts. I went over right away and told the guy that not only was he going to stop filming, but he was going to rewind his tape and retape over the offensive part. I was hot, and the guy looked like a sheep molester anyway. In a flash, Owen was there to lend a helping hand. "Hey, you two," he said in his phony, over-exaggerated way. "How about I get some footage of you two together?" I was hot and getting hotter. "Stop it, Owen," I demanded. "This guy's a little pervert." "Oh, come on, Jack," Owen cheerily answered back. "Come on, he's a big fan. Let's get some footage. Maybe you can put your arm around him, Jack." I was still hot, but I knew I was fighting a losing battle. "Owen," I pleaded with him, but it was no use. I'd lost the fight. Now when that little pervert from Newfoundland watches his home videos, he not only has clips of China's breasts, but tape of me with my arm around him as well. He could drive you crazy and tick you off, but I find myself laughing out loud when I think of Owen now. He was the undisputed king of the prank phone calls as well. He would drive the guys crazy by calling their rooms pretending to be an autograph-seeking fan. What are you, too big a star to come down here and sign? He'd yell into the phone. Never mind, just give me your room number and I'll be right up to get them myself. Inevitably, he'd offer to fight them, and many was the time a furious wrestler came running to the lobby, only to find a calm Owen saying, "What's wrong? You look upset." Owen got me one night in Toledo, Ohio, after I bragged to him about what a great rate I'd gotten at the Red Roof Inn. We would always tip each other off as to where the good deals were because, like me, Owen liked to save his money, but also, like me, he'd spare no expense on his family. I was just about to drift off when the phone rang, and a pleasant sounding man with a soft English accent said, "Hello, Mr. Foley, how are you this evening?" I could literally picture this guy with the gray hair and glasses and a thick wool sweater. The man continued in his pleasant way, "Mr. Foley, I'm afraid that after checking our accounts, we have found that we did not charge you enough money for your room." I was stunned. I'd been in wrestling for over 13 years at that point and had never heard of raising a rate after checking in. "Sir, I don't think you can do that," I politely stated. "Oh, young man, I'm afraid I can, and wait. Are you one of the wrestlers?" the old gentleman wanted to know. "Yes, sir, I am," I was glad to tell him. The old man spoke again. "Wrestling? Hmm. Isn't that all fake?" I was kind of perplexed, but I wasn't about to lose my rate. Besides, I knew how to handle this. "Well, sir," I pleasantly began, "it's about 67% real. One guy got down to 62, but they had to let him go." The old man wasn't buying my line. "Oh, Mr. Foley, you are very funny. But just last week I saw you stomping your foot on the mat instead of really hitting somebody. I used to box, you know." Now I was starting to become perturbed. "Sir, I really don't think you should be calling up customers or insulting their livelihood." The old man instantly apologized. "Oh, Mr. Foley, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me." After I did and assured him that everything was fine, he spoke up one more time. "I'm afraid I'm still going to have to raise your rate." "What?" I yelled, when suddenly I heard laughter on the other end of the line. I knew I'd been had by the best. "Owen!" I yelled. "You prick." Everything he did seemed to be done with a sense of both innocence and mischief. In a beautiful column that Brett wrote in the Calgary Sun, he said, "Owen never stopped looking at the world through the eyes of a child." That trait made every day a new adventure for Owen, whether he was accidentally marking up your hand during an autograph session, writing a sappy "Let's be friends" over where you just signed your name, or pulling the emergency brake on a poor fan friend Ronnie Gaff's truck in the middle of traffic. He truly seemed to love every day. He had a seriousness to him as well, but far from being a dark side. It may have actually been the best part of him. He didn't drink, disdained drugs, and was the only guy in the company who went out less than I did. He truly loved his wife and kids, Oj and Athena, and his face used to light up when he spoke of them, which was often. He spoke of simple pleasures like hot chocolate on a porch swing with his wife and planning Disney vacations for his family. His wife said they had not only their next day planned together, but their next month and year and the next 40 years as well. I used to tell my wife that of all the guys, Owen was the most like me. I realize now that it was probably wishful thinking on my part. He was better than me. He was the best of us. He was probably the nicest, funniest, most moral man I have ever met. As I write this, I'm reminded of a song titled Reflections that was written by Charlie Daniels over 20 years ago, and which I will paraphrase just slightly for Owen. "And Owen, my buddy, above all the rest, I miss you the most, and I love you the best. And now that you're gone, I thank God I was blessed just to know you." I can't interpret every line literally, except for the last one, for there were people who knew Owen longer, loved him better, and will miss him more. But Owen, I do thank God that I was blessed just to know you. Rest in peace, my aggravating, instigating, wonderful friend, and may God bless your beautiful wife and children. Chapter 34. Business was rolling along as we looked toward SummerSlam, which was traditionally the second biggest show of the year. Shawn Michaels was getting over well as champion and would be facing The Undertaker as half of a double main event. The other half would pit me and Undertaker. Oh, he's going to be facing Vader. The other half would pit me and The Undertaker in a boiler room brawl. The concept of the boiler room brawl was simple but somewhat unusual. The match would start with the two of us inside the boiler room at the Gund Arena in Cleveland and would continue until one of us could leave the room and gain possession of the Undertaker's urn, which Paul Bearer, Taker's manager, held in mid-ring. I loved the concept and had actually given similar ideas to WCW, which unsurprisingly had fallen on deaf ears. By having a match that was unique to television and could not be replicated in an arena show, I felt we had great ratings draw on our hands. We actually taped the boiler room part of the match the night before the pay-per-view and filmed everything else live. Undertaker had been out of the day in promotional appearance and was exhausted when he arrived. He then dressed and walked into an empty boiler room. The match was either a classic or a disaster, depending on who you talked to. There was really no middle ground. I believe the former, and in many ways the boiler room brawl felt more like an unloved child whose goodness only I could see. I had read interviews in which actor Billy Crystal felt much the same way about his movie Mr. Saturday Night, which was a personal favorite that had met with poor response. I told a mutual friend, Barry Blaustein, who's been working on a wrestling documentary for the past 4 years, that Mr. Saturday Night had been a particular favorite among several wrestlers, including myself, and was told that Billy really appreciated it. So if any fans want to stop me in an airport and heap praise on my unloved child, I would feel the same way. I remember Michael Hayes pumping me up before I stepped into the room by saying, "Cactus, this is the match that you'll be showing to your grandchildren," and saying, "This is what Grandpa used to do." I stepped in and waited for the taker to arrive. The psychology was in the room I would have the advantage because since Mankind's Federation debut, he had been filled inside the room as if it were his lair. My heart was pounding as he came near. There was no crowd to pump us up, so a great deal of mental preparation had gone into my pre-match ritual. I had to fight the urge to feel stupid inside this big dark room with only one cameraman as a spectator. Looking back, I honestly feel that there were three things wrong with the match. Two of them were conceptual, and one of them in execution. For one thing, the entire match was a one camera shot in dark, murky conditions. The cameraman did a tremendous job, but I later felt that the whole thing had looked like a well done home movie instead of a pay per view main event. The second conceptual problem was even more damaging, although the decision itself was born out of a complaint. Vince liked the match so much that he decided not to do commentary over it, even though, as usual, I had visualized much of the match with Vince and JR in mind. The third fault, if you can call it that, was that the brawl itself was just too long. 17 minutes inside the room itself was an awfully long time, and many people could not see past the silence and length to the quality and intensity of what we were doing. One journalist described it as being like a Hollywood fight scene, except way too long. I think that needs to be rethought a little. A 3 minute Hollywood fight scene could take weeks to rehearse and film. We did ours in one take with one camera. So I think a more accurate critique might read like a Hollywood fight scene, except without rehearsing, choreography, editing, special effects, sound effects, scripts, or a best boy. It may have been too long, but damn, we put a lot into it, including a bump that went astray. Near the end of the match, I had Undertaker down and pulled out a ladder from the darkness. As usual, I could hear the announcer in my head as the match progressed. "He's got a ladder, JR. I believe he's going to attempt to hit the—" "No, Vince. Mankind is setting the ladder up and is ascending its wooden rugs. JR, he must be 10, 15, 20 feet in the air. Unbelievable." Unfortunately, we got nothing of the sort, even though the live crowd seemed to enjoy watching on the monitors in the arena, especially when Undertaker sat up and dumped me off the ladder. He was able to pull the ladder toward him, and as I started to go, I tried to land in relative safety on a pile of cardboard boxes that were scattered on the floor. Unfortunately, the top of the ladder became caught on the rafters of the boiler room, and I landed violently, several feet short of my intended target. My upper body landed somewhat safely, but my lower body, where I actually store 9/10 of my body weight, landed roughly on the cold, hard concrete below. The botched landing would actually result in the onset of a 7-month sciatic nerve problem that, for a while, I legitimately thought would cause me to retire. I was actually the first one out of the room, but I was feeling much worse for the wear. We had both beaten on each other pretty good, and I was ready to crash into a comfortable bed after a long hot shower. Instead, I stood for over an hour inside the building, waiting for one of the TV contract guys to show up in his rented Lincoln and take me to my crummy Days Inn room across the street from the porno shops before checking himself into the Marriott. The next evening, we picked up where we had left off, with me trying to get into the ring and Taker beating on me the whole way there. I kept throwing obstacles in his way, and like Michael Myers from Halloween, he kept coming back. I finally got the edge with a somewhat less than my best pile driver and tried to enter the ring where Paul Bearer nervously held the sacred urn. The cold, purple-gloved hand of the dead man stopped my progress, and we jockeyed for position on the ring apron. Taker stopped me for a moment and, using the ropes as a slingshot, hurled my body backward where it crashed flat-backed on the concrete, which was cold and hard, with a sickening thud. He then dropped to one knee and reached out with his waiting glove for the urn that would signify victory. There was only one problem for the Taker. Paul wouldn't give it to him. He held out his hand again, this time impatiently, while the crowd stood up and I rolled back into the ring. Undertaker got to his feet, but I was there to cut him off with my mandible claw. Once down, the Undertaker started crawling toward Paul as I laid in heavy, and I do mean heavy, boots to the head. I can't believe that I kicked someone I actually liked that hard, even if it was a big show. Even with the boots slowing down his progress, he kept crawling to Paul until he was on his knees and looking at his chubby buddy with a "why me" look that made me think of Nancy Kerrigan after the Galooly Harding pipe job scandal. Uncle Paul then methodically lifted the magic urn and came down hard with it on the dead man's head. He handed me the urn, and we left triumphantly as a team. Undertaker and I had been wrestling each other for 5 months, but in essence, we're just getting started. I left for Puerto Rico 3 days after the match. Savio Vega was a Puerto Rican wrestler who was running opposition to the long-standing Capital Sports, the company that Bruiser Brody was killed working for. I took the 3 dates in Puerto Rico as a way to pay for a playset that I was planning on getting the kids. The Undertaker was scheduled to be my opponent for the tour and was still sporting a large gash on his elbow that he'd received in the boiler room. My first night on the island resulted in one of my worst memories. As I heard my music, I made my way to the entrance and was immediately doused with a full cup of liquid from close range that was not just thrown at random, but actually poured down the back of my neck. I'd been hit with beer and sodas for years and had long ago accepted it as part of the job. But this liquid was different. It was warm. I felt the warmth, smelled the foul odor, and knew right away what it was. Someone had poured a full cup of urine on me. Needless to say, I didn't want to wrestle. I really thought maybe the kids would be fine swinging on the $94 Kmart special. I did end up wrestling, and I did buy that playset, even though every time I watched my two peanuts swinging happily or sliding joyfully, I'd automatically think of being doused with bodily fluids. And I'm not talking about the body fluid I used to douse Al Snow with either. Yes, maybe not a knockout, but definitely a stiff jab. The next day, the Undertaker walked in looking like hell warmed over. This time, the dead man really did look like a dead man. His face was pale and he was sweating profusely. Worse yet, his elbow was swollen to twice its normal size. Staph infection was a common casualty of the business, but this was the worst case I had ever seen. A doctor was brought in and lanced the elbow. He then squeezed hard, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that pus shot 10 feet across the room. It was nauseating, but somehow the taker made it to the ring and performed the next 2 nights. After that, in his absence, the old cowboy was called in, resulting in the classic Mankind Watts showdown I described earlier. Genius is a word often used to describe Vince McMahon. I've been around Vince long enough to feel that it is true, but Vince also has a couple of other attributes that are equally important in the success of his company: common sense and a willingness to admit when he's wrong. Stone Cold Steve Austin is probably the biggest draw in the history of the sport, but during Labor Day weekend 1996, he was just another guy trying to make a living. And at that time, his salary was about half that of Mark Marrow. Labor Day weekend meant the World Wrestling Federation traditional Tent Town tour of New England, where we wrestled in such prestigious venues as the Cape Cod Melody Tent. Actually, the shows were a lot of fun, and promoter Larry Bonhoff was a great guy, but nobody got rich in the tent towns. It was outside one of these tents in the backstage area that I heard one of the most ironic comments of my life. I was approached backstage by a man named Jimmy Miranda. Now, Jimmy has approached a lot of men, but this visit concerned merchandising. He had a list of names on a chart with various marketing ideas listed for them. I could see that Mark Henry, the Olympic weightlifter, figured to be a big part of the World Wrestling Federation's merchandising future. Checked off by his name was everything ranging from foam fingers to red, white, and blue bandanas, at least 25 items in all. Also featured prominently was the stalker, Barry Windham, who probably had about 15 potential items. Miranda had said the company wanted to merchandise Mankind and asked what I thought about a Mankind mask for kids. I told him that I was flattered, but didn't think that a mask that was supposed to be scary to kids should be able to be worn by kids. I did tell him that I thought a shirt and an action figure would be a great idea, and he checked off both. At that time, Asa was walking over and said, "Hey Miranda, when are you going to come out with some Stone Cold merchandise?" Miranda grew silent and didn't seem to know what to say. Steve again questioned him, jokingly asking, "Come on, Jimmy, how about a shirt for Stone Cold?" Miranda again seemed at a loss for words and paused at length before slowly breaking the bad news. "I'm sorry, Steve, but the office just doesn't see any interest in your merchandise right now." Wow. And to think within a year, Austin's merchandise would outsell Mark Henry's 2 to 1. 2 million to 1, that is. That illustrates the difference between World Wrestling Federation and WCW. In WCW, a guy's spot was his spot. There was and still is no room for upward mobility. If WCW had Austin, they wouldn't have done a damn thing with him. Hey, wait a minute, they did have Austin. And if my memory serves me correctly, they didn't do a damn thing with him. Vince, on the other hand, sensed the momentum and went with it, riding the Austin craze to huge levels of popularity and financial gain. In the Federation, merit actually counts. Maybe that's why Tuesday mornings aren't quite as fun for Eric Bischoff anymore. Bischoff had once been quoted as saying, "I used to really look forward to Tuesday mornings to see the ratings, but lately we've been kicking their ass so bad that it's just not that fun anymore." I guess Eric must have never heard the old proverb about kicking your chickens before they hatch. Also, if kicking the other company's ass so bad isn't any fun, I feel real sorry for Vince. He must be miserable. But hey, let's give Bish his due. At this point, they were on top and would stay that way for a long time, largely due to the hiring of Nash, Hall, and a host of other big names who had jumped ship for some of Turner's guaranteed big money contracts. It got so bad that Vince had to start guaranteeing money as well in order to keep Titan Sports from it sinking like Titanic Sports. The new blood and the hot WCW versus NWO feud would keep Bischoff on top for most of the next year and a half, but timing, greed, and a lack of focus would eventually send my former company into a tailspin, to the point that their audience is now limited mainly to older men and kids whose parents won't let them watch our show. For his part, Vince never panicked and instead focused his new shows around his remaining stars and two new additions like myself, Austin, and Goldust, who were more than happy to pick up the pieces. And God bless, Goldust in the top three. Strangely, in retrospect, losing so much talent may have actually helped the World Wrestling Federation as well as the competition and wrestling in general. The loss cleaned out a lot of talent that was stale, made for better morale in the dressing room, ignited the wrestling war that spring-loaded the sport's resurgence, and most importantly, at least to me, allowed 30-year-old Mick Foley a chance to have the spotlight. I had been training diligently for my next pay-per-view match, which I had high hopes for. In a period of 24 hours, I had gone from trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do on the show with Mark Merrow, to now being told I would wrestle the champion, Shawn Michaels. Wow, I went from being a curtain jerker to wrestling one of the top guys in the business with one phone call. I was excited as hell about working with Michaels, who had a reputation for being two things: a pain in the ass and a brilliant performer. As far as being a pain in the ass, well, I got along fine with him, even though I couldn't blame others who didn't. As far as being a brilliant performer, he certainly was. He actually looked like the perfect opponent for me in that he was everything I wasn't. Small, handsome, a great physique, athletic, and a decent dancer too. It was actually a classic babyface wrapped around a 90s attitude. I watched hours of tapes of Michaels hoping to pick up on certain things he did. Instead, I learned that it wasn't necessarily what he did, but how he did it. Literally everything he did looked good. I didn't have to worry about copying anyone else. I would just do it my way, and Shawn Michaels would take care of the rest. The match to be held at the Philadelphia Core State Center was on my mind for hours every day. I could visualize every detail and had no doubt that it would be a tremendous match. Going into the match, I was more confident than ever before. I was completely focused and I knew that I was in shape, a factor that usually haunts me until the moment I step into the ring. That night in Philly, I was given interview time to try to turn the fans against me. The World Wrestling Federation crowd was vast in scope compared to the bingo hall, but the old Cactus Jack still had his share of fans in the city of brotherly love. I don't know if my interview was successful, but there were certainly fewer Mankind fans when I was through. I was also met with scattered shouts of "you sold out," which had been common throughout my Federation tenure. I still don't understand the whole "you sold out" mentality. Selling out suggests going against personal principles and priorities for the sake of money. I guess in that case, I used to check my personal principles and priorities in wrestling, which are: I like to wrestle, I like to do it well and in front of a large number of people, and I like to be paid well for doing so. So far, during my 4 month run in the Federation, I was wrestling better in front of bigger audiences and for more money than I ever had before. So even though I usually carry enough guilt with me to start my own religion, in the case of Foley versus the selfish fans of the world, I was innocent of all charges. The match itself was even better than I could have ever anticipated. The pace was tremendous, the timing was perfect, the story was well told, the crowd was hot, and the execution was excellent. We put 27 minutes into what was undoubtedly the finest match of my career. There is no doubt in my mind that it was the best match of the year and one of the greatest in history. Unfortunately, it often goes overlooked when classic matches are talked about because it was a matchup with no real history on a card that was relatively free of hype and ended with a finish that many didn't like. While it's true that the run-in ending featuring Undertaker, Psycho Sid, and the Undertaker, Vader, Psycho, I don't know why I keep calling Vader the Undertaker. Vader, Psycho Sid, and the Undertaker did tarnish the match a tiny bit. I don't think it should detract from the other 26 minutes and 45 seconds that we worked so hard on. I think it also should be noted that Mind Games in Philadelphia in September 1996 was the first time that Shawn Michaels and Mick Foley had ever faced each other in any way, shape, or form. It was truly a special night, and try as I might, I don't think I've ever been quite that good again. This match is also on the short list of the 3 best things I've ever done in wrestling. Coming off the heels of Mind Games, I was pumped for my next pay-per-view engagement, this time a main event with The Undertaker called Buried Alive. The goal was simple: take your opponent from the ring to the graveyard, which was located by the entrance, and bury him alive. Now, obviously, no one was really going to die, but we had ourselves a hell of a match anyway. I actually lost the match after being partially buried, but with a little help from Terry Gordy as the executioner, was able to put the dead man in the ground. At one point, the office wanted me and Terry to fill the hole by ourselves, but I thought the prospect of filling a 6 foot by 4 foot hole with 2 guys might be a little unrealistic. As it turned out, my intuition was wise, because not only was I exhausted from wrestling for 20 minutes, but my partner, the executioner, was filling the hole in the same manner that a cat covers up poop in a litter box. Thankfully, every bad guy in the company helped out, and even with all that help, we still only got the hole half filled. Then, dramatically, a lightning bolt hurtled through the audience and struck the grave, and the Undertaker's gloved hand broke through the earth as Jim Ross yelled, "He's alive! He's alive!" as we went off the air. When we went off the air, the Undertaker emerged through the dirt where he was helped to the back. No, I'm sorry, that's not what happened. When we went off the air, the wrestlers dug him out of the grave and he received emergency medical treatment. No, that wasn't it either. Oh yeah, I remember. When we went off the air, the New Rockers music played and Mario Jannetty and Al Snow came running out to wrestle the Bushwhackers in a special bonus match. Once home, I threw a tremendous Halloween party for my kids and their friends. Our new playset was up, and we rented a moonwalk for the driveway, which was a huge success. Following last year's Batman with cowboy boots embarrassment, I gave in and let the kids buy the cheesy costumes I had once sworn they never would. So it was with just a bit of sadness that I watched my children kill off tradition, dressed as Buzz Lightyear and a banana in pajamas. On the heels of Buried Alive, I came back again against The Undertaker in November's Survivor Series at what was probably the biggest disappointment of my career. In front of the Madison Square Garden fans, I was amazingly mediocre. It was a tough one to put behind me, but I vowed to have a strong showing on the following evening's Raw. My opponent the next evening was Steve Austin in what was the first ever Mankind Stone Cold match, or the first singles match that Steve Austin and Mick Foley had ever been in, period. Steve's character was really catching on and had just had a tremendous Survivor Series match with Bret Hart. Steve and I had been talking frequently about the contracts we had recently been offered that, while not embarrassing, were not nearly on the level of Mark Marrow. This filled us both with the potent combination of pride and anger, and we vowed to show Vince the error of his contractual ways. Without even talking about what we'd do, we tore the house down in a match that many called the best Raw match in several years. There was nothing fancy about it, just a great give and take contest, but the intensity was high and the chemistry was there, as it would continue to be during our World Wrestling Federation history. After that night's matches, I met with Vince for a scheduled contract meeting. He acknowledged what a great match I'd had and how large my contributions to the company had been, but he mentioned that he was disappointed that I had not signed my contract yet. I told him that I appreciated the offer, but could not, on principle, sign for less money than Mark Miro had. Vince was visibly disappointed. Mick, he said, you gotta understand from a business perspective that we will be much more likely to get behind somebody who we know we have a long-term investment in. I did understand that, but the image of mind games with Michaels and the house shows with Undertaker and my match that night with Austin ran through my head. Then I thought of Mero, his poor match that same evening, and a match he had with The Undertaker that was so bad it defied belief. And believe me, it wasn't The Undertaker who was at fault. Then I spoke. Vince, I can understand that, but you've got to understand that I have to get up every morning and look in the mirror, and it will be hard to do that if I sign for the amount you're talking about. Vince considered what I'd said before giving his retort. What we're offering you is just the minimum guarantee. It's a worst case scenario. It means even if the bottom drops out of the business, you're going to make at least that amount. But in all likelihood, you're going to make far more than your guarantee. That was definitely a compelling argument, but unfortunately for the Vin man, I had irrefutable evidence on my side. Vince, I slowly replied, I don't want to seem ungrateful because I've had a great time here and I'm happy with the way you've used me. Maybe you're not aware of it, but I'm not making a whole hell of a lot more here in the Federation than I was last year in bingo halls and parking lots. Vince seemed genuinely stunned. I had no idea, Vince assured me, but I'll check on that, and believe me, that's going to change. With that, we shook hands and parted ways. Several months would go by before the subject of my contract was brought up again. The next few months reinforced my opinion of Vince as a true man of his word. Unfortunately, this reinforcement was a good news, bad news proposition for Mick Foley. The good news was that my checks picked up immediately. In some cases, my payouts doubled in the same arenas I had been to earlier. The bad news was, Vince stuck to his guns about being hesitant to get behind a wrestler who hadn't signed his deal. Don't get me wrong, I still wasn't buried or even abused, and in fact was still often wrestling on top of the card, but my TV presence was reduced greatly. I even went several months without any interview time on Raw. In the meantime, my back was getting progressively worse to the point where my sciatica was making my life a hard one to live. Sciatica refers to pain that is usually caused by a herniated disc pressing on the sciatic nerve. Although the point of pressure is in the lower back, the pain radiates throughout the entire nerve, which extends down the buttocks all the way past the calf. Many of the everyday things I'd taken for granted became difficult and agonizing to do. Training with weights was next to impossible, cardiovascular work was arduous, and even standing still was physically demanding. Often I would have to sit down after standing only momentarily. I'd be in line at an airport and would have to sit down. Even though done while sitting, a trip to the toilet was no longer fun. Life in general was miserable, and over time I began to overcompensate for the back injury, forcing my body to curl up like the letter S. My days off were few and far between, and much of my free time was spent at the chiropractor or with a massage therapist. When I was with Colette and the kids, it was difficult to do anything but lie down and watch TV. Even our yearly trip to Disney World was marred to a great degree by my inability to ride anything but It's a Small World. Sure, it's a nice, pleasant ride, but after our fifth trip, even 3-year-old Noel was looking at Big Daddy-O as if he were some kind of wimpazoid. Adding to my woes at the Magic Kingdom was the news that my televised match with The Undertaker, which I'd hoped would snap the WCW win streak, had actually been a non-factor in the ratings, which stayed exactly the same. I'd pictured Vince diving to his knees, begging my forgiveness, forever putting me in a different tax bracket from Mark Marrow. But unfortunately, as my daughter ran in terror from Minnie Mouse, I realized that it was not meant to be. Later that day, I ran into wrestler Scott Taylor, who may be an even bigger Disney nerd than me. It really is a small world after all, but I wouldn't want to paint it. After my Disney letdown, I received a phone call at home from Jim Cornette. He was all excited. Cactus, he said in his high-pitched Louisville lingo. I know you haven't been in the mix that much, but dadgum, I think we got something great for you. Hey, this is great. What is it, Corny? Well, Cactus, we were thinking of doing a little something where Mark, Marrow, and Rena continue their little spat, and you don't like it, so you deck Mark. You built Rena with your little group, but Uncle Paul doesn't like it, so you deck Paul. Now, Paul still doesn't like Rena, but he knows he has to tolerate her for your sake, and the three of you will have your own strange little family. Now, usually Jim Cornette can make anything sound good, but this time I wasn't buying it. I think he would have had an easier time selling me a timeshare in Kosovo than convincing me of my career benefits of having a run with Mark Marrow. My face must have given me away because Colette passed me a note reading, "What's wrong?" while Corny rambled. I wrote back, "They want me to wrestle Marrow." Colette's face quickly converted into a mask of disdain, as if she just smelled a fart or seen an Al Snow match. Jimmy finished his pitch with a big, "So what do you think?" After thinking on it for about a second, I firmly stated, "I hate it, Jimmy. I really hate it." Corny had to laugh. "Jesus Christ, Cactus, why don't you say what you mean? What don't you like about it?" I got real serious because I'd been thinking a lot about my future, which didn't look real good at the moment. "Corny," I sadly began, "I've taken a lot of risks and I've taken a lot of bumps, and most of the time I think I can get through anything. But my back hurts so damn much that I can't take it much longer, and I'm seriously thinking about retiring. And if I'm going to retire, I want to go out on top." Jimmy was temporarily speechless, but when he did speak, it was with uncharacteristic restraint. "Cactus, I know it's not the best angle in the world, but Vince just wanted to get you involved in something for WrestleMania." I knew Jimmy was telling the truth, and I felt like he deserved the truth in return. "Jimmy," I slowly started while thinking of the right way to verbalize what was going through my mind. "I'm not saying this to sound like a big shot, and I'm not trying to be sarcastic, but please tell Vince that if all this is about getting me on WrestleMania, I'd really rather just not be on the show." Corny was stunned. "Wow," he exhaled. "I'll tell him, but goddamn, that's got to be a first." For most of the wrestlers, WrestleMania is the biggest moment of their year. For me, a Mankind Marrow matchup with Rena in my corner would not have been the best. When I got to the next television tapings, I was ribbed by all the office members about my conversation with Corny. To make sure he didn't get secondhand information, I told Marrow himself about my feelings. "Mark, just so you know," I explained, "the office proposed a deal with me and you, and I didn't like it, and I told them so." He was actually fine with my decision. Like I tried to say earlier, I don't dislike Mark Marrow, but I can't understate just how much it bothered me that he was bringing in more money than I was. After the taping, Vince was gracious enough to have a meeting with me that included Vince's right-hand man, Bruce Pritchard, Paul Bearer, and future McMahon stooge, and I mean that in a good way, Gerald Briscoe. They ribbed me in a good-natured way about the Marrow proposal, and especially the line about missing WrestleMania. Then Vince asked in all sincerity if I had a better idea. Remember, I was still honestly considering retirement and wanted to go out with pride. "What about Vader?" I said. "Vader's been kind of written off, but that's only because his head's been messed around with so much. Let him do what he does best, and I guarantee I'll show you a match you won't believe." I was passionate about this belief and explained in great detail about our history, my ear, and WCW's refusal to act on what surely would be a big money matchup. Vince seemed genuinely impressed, but added some intelligent insight. "I like it, Mick, but let's not go into this thing, which could be huge, based solely on your past history with another company. Let's create our own history, and then we can refer to the past as an additional resource." On that night, the Mankind Vader team was born, and though it never did lead to a feud of any type, it made for good television with me and Leon always at odds, and even planted a Mankind babyface seed. More important, it gave me a WrestleMania matchup with Owen Hart and the Bulldog and a little bit of pride. By February, my back was at its absolute worst. At the urging of several wrestlers, I saw a shiatsu massage expert called Francois Petit, who was also a martial arts world champion and Hollywood fight choreographer. He had worked on wrestlers ranging from Andre the Giant and Ted DiBiase to Steve Austin and Shawn Michaels. The wrestlers swore by him, and I was impressed enough to venture out to Santa Monica, California for treatment. Francois has since gone on to work with the wrestlers 6 days a month and has become a good friend. He tells me now that of all his cases, my back was the strangest and hardest to work on. He said my spine was more like that of a crocodile, as if it had adapted itself to punishment after all the years of abuse. His shiatsu work was not the pristine picture of relaxing therapy, but instead it consisted of pressure points and agonizing deep tissue work. If it had been a match, I would have submitted. Some people expressed doubt about Francois's abilities, but I know for a fact that when I left his house, I could stand straight for the first time in months. Unfortunately, it was a short-lived, as being suplexed nightly and sitting in 25B all the way to Germany is probably not the right method of sciatic nerve rehabilitation, but at least for a moment, I had hope. While I was in Germany, where I actually did get to do PR work, Colette begged me for a vacation. I told her about the great discounts available on last-minute cruises, and she booked us on a 3-day trip aboard the Big Red Boat. The ship was set to sail 2 days after my return to the States, which would give us a chance to do a jungle village in Cape Canaveral, a fun little park featuring an arcade, miniature golf, and a maze. It was not unlike hundreds of other small fun parks, but for a few years my kids swore up and down that they liked it better than Disney. No lines, no pushy tour groups, and no 6-foot rodent with a head the size of a Maytag washer to run in terror from. We had fun, but I was literally in agony, and I was forced to do something I'd tried to avoid at all costs. "Hello, Vince," I said over the phone. "This is Mick Foley, and I wanted to talk to you about my back." Vince asked about my condition, and when I gave him the bad news, I added, "Vince, I really hate to do this, but I think I'm going to need some time off to rest my back." I could hear the sound of pages turning as he rifled through his calendar, where he spoke again in a serious tone. "I see here where I can give you 2 days off at the end of April." I couldn't believe it. What kind of an insensitive asshole was I working for? I wanted to chew him out, but I honestly didn't know what to say about it. It had been a joke, and I realized immediately that I had swallowed hook, line, and sinker. Vince then got serious for real. "Mick, please tell me when, and I will give you as much time off as you need." I've mentioned before how important it is for me to make all my bookings. To me, it's not only a professional responsibility, but also a matter of personal pride. I don't feel like I have to be on every show, just every show that I'm booked on. Therefore, I rationalized if I took time off in April, I wouldn't really be missing bookings because the cards hadn't been booked yet. After WrestleMania, which was at the end of March, we were scheduled for a Middle East tour to Dubai or some other country where they wear towels on their heads. In the interim period, I would have an MRI done on my injured back. I asked if I could have time off after that. I'd actually gone for an MRI for my back 2 months earlier, but had left in shame and hadn't wanted to show my face again. Being in an MRI is kind of like being in a coffin, and you need to lie absolutely still for up to 45 minutes for the magnetic resonance imaging to take place. Many people get claustrophobic and need to be sedated before going in. I was offered such medication, but calmly told them that when I'd had an MRI done on my knees, I'd been so naturally relaxed that I'd fallen asleep inside. No anti-anxiety medicine for me, thank you. I've forgotten to consider that when a knee is done, the patient's head is left in the open, but when a back is done, the whole body is enclosed. That was a big consideration to forget. To make matters worse, the damn thing was so small that I had to raise my arms over my head to fit in. After about 5 minutes, I started to fidget. "Stay still, Mr. Foley," came the voice over my headphones. A few minutes later, my shoulders started hurting from being held in a strenuous position for so long. I involuntarily kicked my legs. "We're going to have to start over, Mr. Foley," came the voice. Great, I sarcastically thought. A few minutes later, I started feeling like the walls were closing in. I felt my eyeball was in contact with the MRI machine. I'd often felt claustrophobic when I was thrown in the Undertaker's casket after a difficult match, where I tried to breathe coffin air while the audience banged on the damn thing. It rolled down the aisle. This, however, was far worse. I thought deeply about what to do and finally made the only decision that a hardcore king of the deathmatch could. I hit the panic button and screamed to be let out. Determined not to have the same thing again, I requested an open MRI, which allows much more room to function in. The feeling is not nearly as intense, but I would still be required to stay still for over 40 minutes, and that concerned me. To combat the tendency to twitch, I had Colette read to me from the current book I was working on, Don't Know Much About the Civil War, by Kenneth C. Davis. Sadly, Colette doesn't share my passion for history, and as a result, she had about as much enthusiasm as Steve Blackman reading a bedtime story, as she recounted the irony of Thomas Jefferson writing the Declaration of Independence while being a slaveholder himself. When the MRI was done, I was handed the film that I would take to the doctor with me the following morning. "Could I look at them?" I asked the technician. "Sure," she replied. "They're yours, but I doubt that you'd be able to see anything on them. You really need a doctor to read them." Apparently, she didn't know who she was dealing with. I took one look and made my diagnosis. "Looks like a herniation of the disc between L4 and L5, and the pressure on my nerve is what is causing the shooting pain down my leg." The woman looked impressed. So did Colette. "Look, hun," I told her while pointing to one of the spiral discs on the film. "This disc is discolored. It's completely white. Let's ask the doctor about that." The next day, I took my MRI results and my expert opinion to the orthopedic surgeon's office. Upon introduction, I asked him to look at the film and then repeated my educated finding. "Looks like a herniation of the disc between L4 and L5, huh, Doc?" The doctor looked surprised. "It certainly does look that way, Mr. Foley," he affirmed. I shot a smile of pride to Colette. "Tell him about that disc," she said. "Oh, yes, doctor," I said, as if we were both part of the same fellowship. "In addition to the herniation of that disc, I'm a bit concerned about the severe discoloration of this other disc. As you can tell, it's white instead of the gray color of the other discs." The doctor smiled and seemed both amused and sad to tell me the news. "Mr. Foley," he knowingly began, "all of your discs are supposed to be white." The gray color indicated a degenerative condition in all of the remaining discs in your back. "Oh," was all my educated mind could say. I felt as if I were standing in front of him with snakeskin boots and a Batman costume on. A real doofus. A doofus with a pretty screwed up back. We're going to need to do an epidural, he warned me, referring to the practice of injecting long needles directly into the affected disc to reduce the swelling. Even then, he continued, it's only a 50% chance that you won't have to have surgery. This wasn't the news I was looking for at all, so I asked one more question, hoping against hope for a favorable reply. Is there any treatment that doesn't require the epidural shots? No, was his firm reply. I was scheduled to begin treatment right after WrestleMania, but luckily fate intervened, or maybe just dumb luck, because the overseas tour was canceled. The tour was scheduled for 8 days, followed by 6 days off. This gave me 2 full weeks off, the longest rest we'd had since my arrival in the Federation. I began my conservative treatment of ice and rest in the 2 days before WrestleMania. For those days, I lay in bed all day while applying ice every 20 minutes and eating delicious Chicago-style pizza every 2 hours. After Mania, I continued my rest and ice treatment combined with stretching, which was absolutely excruciating. Thankfully and damn near miraculously, it worked. I called Vince up and had him put me back on the booking sheet. I very well could have been George Costanza yelling, "Baby, I'm back!" The doctor seemed almost saddened to hear of my healing powers. I had healed myself and had done it without his needles and surgery. As my daughter would say, Nana Boo Boo. I returned to the ring wars with gusto and was even chosen to be Undertaker's first opponent after winning the World Wrestling Federation title at WrestleMania. Are you sure that people will want to see this match? I'd asked Vince. Apparently, Vince had more faith in me than I did, and the match was signed and went on to be not only very good, but profitable as well. This was our fifth go round on pay per view and would come up big on four of them. I had no way of knowing that would come up biggest of all 14 months later. The month of May was significant for two odd things that happened. The first took place in Toronto after the matches when I BS with Bruce Pritchard and Jim Ross while I waited for Stone Cold, who was talking contract with Vinnie Mac. By this point, Austin's career had exploded, and I could no longer reasonably compare my contract desires to his, but I hoped he'd get to what he had coming to him anyway. It is a great credit to him that despite his huge success, he has stayed level-headed and has never stopped being one of the boys. Austin had been in conversation behind closed doors with Vince for a while, and the three of us were chatting amicably when Bruce asked me something a little strange. Do you have any of that footage I heard about when you were due love? I had to laugh. Yeah, I'm sure I have it somewhere, but why? Bruce smiled. Maybe as the former brother Love, he had a deep affection for another Love namesake. We want to put it on TV, he said. Come on, I yelled, disbelieving. You can't put it on TV. It's terrible. It doesn't matter, Bruce assured me. We'll just put on small clips. It sold me. Okay, I relented, but how are you going to use it? Bruce looked at JR. Don't worry, he smiled. JR has an idea. The second thing of significance was the first ever matchup between The Rock and Mankind on the May pay-per-view from Richland, Virginia. Unfortunately, at that time, The Rock was Rocky Maivia, and he may have been the most hated wrestler in the company. Which is fine if that's your job description, but Rocky was supposed to be a good guy. He had all the attributes of a good guy, but unfortunately, he had come along 20 years too late, and although he was a good young talent, no one was buying what Rocky had to sell. I was starting to get a lot of cheers, and since The Rock was getting booed out of every building he appeared in, I was the babyface by process of elimination. Poor Rock. We had a good match, but the fans just hated the guy. And when Rock hit me with a high cross body block off the top, I rolled through with the mandible claw for the victory, and the roar of the crowd was deafening. The next day, one of the guys asked for my impression of Rocky. Hey, he's a nice guy, I said, but he just doesn't have it. The office should probably just cut their losses and get rid of this guy. I had no idea that I was talking about the future People's and Corporate Champion. Chapter 35. At the end of May, JR talked with me about an idea they were planning. Goldust had just been the subject of a two-part up-close and personal interview that had been very insightful and beneficial to his career. JR felt that a similar interview could yield similar results for me. Vince had heard fragments of my real history and thought that it was actually more captivating than any fictional background. We set a date to do the interview and a second day to try to finalize a contract. I had Colette flown in for the contract talks because she wanted to be there and also because she tended to get a better price for my services than I did. I've been thinking about my interview with JR for several days when I arrived at the television studio for the talk that would change my career. I was told that Vince might be stopping by to check out the interview, which was fine with me. Kevin Dunn, who is a director for the Federation, came up with while I was getting dressed and explained their concept, which involved appearing without the mask as Mick Foley. I actually liked the mask by this point and would wear it for several hours prior to a match. Now, the damn thing smells so bad that I practically put it on while my entrance music is playing. I believed in Mankind and didn't want anyone to see the real Mick Foley just yet, so I came up with this game plan. I would tell the real-life Mick Foley stories, and I would give Mick Foley opinions, but I would do it as Mankind. In actuality, the two weren't that different, as in most cases, the most successful gimmicks were simply an amplified extension of a certain part of the real life personality. I guess in that case, mankind was the insecure side of my personality, the side that had never quite felt accepted. It was that side that surfaced in the Jim Ross interview, and it surfaced in a way that was both funny and touching, and it changed the way people perceived and felt about mankind. People often talk about wrestling being scripted. Actually, in my case, nothing could be further from the truth. Yes, I have a general idea of what I'm trying to accomplish, and yes, sometimes I'm given specific lines to say that will be beneficial in drawing money. But the truth is, in my 3.5 years with the Federation, I have only done two scripted interviews. JR and I talked briefly on the phone the night before taping and went over a few ideas, but the entire interview, with the exception of the mandible claw that I caught JR with at the end, was completely ad libbed. After 15 minutes of talking, I said something I thought was inappropriate and asked if I could do the question over. It was then I saw Vince, who had been watching from the wings. "This is absolutely captivating," he said. I had once been told that for Vince to get completely behind someone, he had to become a fan of his. I believe that night in the studio was when Vince McMahon actually became a fan of mine. I was so completely inside the character that I knew when we were done that I had something special that had just taken place. I consider that interview to be on the list of the three best things I'd ever done. I was 8 years old at Minnestocky Elementary School playing a game of kill the guy with the ball. They have even be an Olympic sport these days. And chasing one of the other students, I made a leap for his legs, and the back of his foot kicked me in the lip. I didn't know what happened. I knew it hurt, Jimmy. I knew it hurt bad. But all of a sudden, people started looking at me in a different way, like there was something wrong with me. I looked down at my Chicago Bears sweatshirt back in the days when they were 2 and 12, and the waning days of Dick Butkus, and my Chicago Bears white sweatshirt had suddenly turned red, and children were running from me, scared. I was bleeding. I was in pain, and I was loving it because I felt I'd finally found something in my life that I could do better than everybody else. Handle pain. Someone said, "Oh, that's just vampire blood," and then saw the open wound from which the blood was flowing. I've still got that shirt, Jimmy. And I remember thinking, wouldn't it be nice if I could do something in my life where I could do this all the time? Get that attention every night. Stockbrokers can't do it. Teachers can't do it. The President of the United States can't bleed for a living, but pro wrestlers can. It's the first time that I realized that I had a calling in my life, and I followed it right down the line. That's all I wanted to do. My brother and I watched them all. Chief Jay Strongbow, Bruno Sammartino, the Valiant Brothers, that's what we wanted to be. Then I broke his nose by backdropping him into his bedroom wall, and Mom said no more wrestling. But she didn't say no more dreaming. Well, Mick Foley continued to pursue his dream, but he paid a heavy price. The emotional scars of this strange childhood are still evident. That's JR's commentary there. I want to tell my son when he gets to be 15 not to be the guy that eats strange things. I never exactly brought it upon myself. Other people in their cliques, for lack of a better word, they would gang up on me because I was different, because I acted different, looked different. They were throwing worms at me, Jimmy, little wiggly worms. They were throwing them at me. Sitting down in athletic class, doing my hurdler stretch, and there was a bombardment of worms being thrown at me. So what do you do to retaliate? You throw the worm back at 7 or 8 people? It's not the fact they were hurting me, they were wounding my pride. They were looking at me like I was garbage. So I picked up the largest specimen, Jimmy, and I sucked it down. To show them that their attempts to hurt my pride would not be successful. I thought, Jimmy, that had shown them, but then sure enough the story became exaggerated, as everything in life does, and it no longer became, well, Mick Foley ate one worm because some kids were picking on him. It became Mickey Foley eats a plate of worms every day. You think I got many dates after that, Jimmy? Probably not. You think girls wanted to kiss a boy who had worms on his breath? I'm a good kisser, but I never got the chance to show it. What am I going to do, practice on myself, Jimmy? I never had the chance to show the world that I could love and could be loved because they ruled me out, because I had a strange appetite for strange things. I'm not going to say I didn't accept money to eat other strange things, but the fact is that damage had been done, and I went through my entire high school days without date number one. You don't think that scarred my soul? Well, maybe you're not looking deep enough. Here's a JR voiceover. Mickey Foley was searching for a place to belong. It was 1983, and upstate New York with its endless rolling fields might be a nice place for a lot of boys, but not when Jimmy Snuka and Don Morocco were in a cage in October in Madison Square Garden. That's where I wanted to be. I didn't want to ride horses along a field. I didn't want to fish for trout in a stream. I wanted to be where the blood and guts were, Jimmy. So I put out my thumb, Jimmy, and it took 16 or 17 hours, but I made my way to the garden. It took just about all the money I had in the world, but I got a front row seat, and I saw the move that would change my life. When Jimmy Snuka came off the top of the cage, and I saw people stand up, and I saw people cheer, and I know I wasn't the only person whose life was changed in that arena. And I realized, Jimmy, that I wanted to do the same things. I wanted to hear people cheer for me because of some act of bravery that I committed. I wanted to see people's emotions. I wanted to see children cry out of love for me and the things I could do inside the ring. I made a movie when I was 18 about myself, maybe as a type of escape where I was a wrestler, and it's strange. The first time I ever met Shawn Michaels, you know him. Oh, yeah, very well. He looked at my scarred and battered body. He didn't know me, but he knew the legend of who I was before, and he said, "Is this the way you always envisioned yourself?" Looking somewhat down on me, and I said, "No. You know, the strange thing is, I always imagined myself being you." And he said, "You mean the champ?" And I said, "No, I mean the girls. Jewelry, the tattoos, the love." So in my movie, I was not Mick Foley. I sure as hell wasn't Mankind. I was Dude Love. Dude Love tape, November 1983. We're going to tear this rotten apple down to its stinky New York core. And while we're here for only one reason only: fame, honor, fortune, glory, to destruct, destroy, and to take that World Wrestling Federation Championship belt. This is Mick again. During the course of the movie, dating back to my experience at Madison Square Garden, I decided I was going to do something heroic. I was going to do something to make people cheer for me. So I ascended onto my friend's roof, and I dove off. JR voiceover. Ironically, the loved one gave Mick Foley his first break. It became an underground hit, which somehow wound up in the hands of wrestling great Dominic DeNucci. DeNucci admired Mick's guts more than his skill and took him under his wing. Every weekend for the next 2 years, Mick traveled 800 miles round trip, eating and sleeping in the back seat of his '79 Ford Fairmont and hoping to realize his dream. I knew I wasn't ready to be Dude Love yet. I never wanted to be Cactus Jack. I figured here's a horrible name for a horrible wrestler, and by golly, as soon as I get the ability that I'll get that heart-shaped tattoo on my chest, I'll get those earrings in, and I'm gonna get the girls. And it never really worked out that way, did it, Jimmy? Not quite. I guess nature didn't cooperate with me. Cactus Jack was supposed to be around for 3 months. He stayed for 11 years. What made Cactus Jack different was that he just wanted it a little more. He was willing to go the extra length. He was willing to sleep in a filthy car in order to achieve his dreams. He was willing to forego romantic relationships to be the best. He was somebody in an era of bodybuilder physiques who carved out his own niche, who said, "I'm going to make it on my own style," who said, "No one else is going to tell me what to do. I'm not going to dye my hair. I'm going to be exactly who I am, and I'm going to do it my way." Jay Argan. Don't you think that it's about time in your life where you look squarely in the mirror and accepted the personal responsibility of who you are? Don't you think that you yourself have caused and brought on all these problems? I think it's time for you to maybe start doing your damn job. I think it's time for you to end this facade of journalistic integrity. You know what you tell the people week in and week out? You say, "Look at Mankind. I don't even know if he feels pain. Or maybe he likes pain." You see, you're a powerful man, Jimmy. You've got the ability to reach a lot of people, to spread the truth, and you neglect to do it. Let me ask you a couple of questions. What is it about pain that I love? You see, I feel just like every other person. You see that? Ripping his hair out violently. It hurts. It is when I get up, when my little boy says, "Daddy, I want to play ball," and I can't do it. Is that where the fun starts? Is it when a doctor injects a 12-inch needle into the discs in my spine so I can wrestle one more day? Whoopee! Let the party begin. I can't believe you sit here and ask me those questions. Do I bring it on myself? I haven't done a damn thing to you. All you've done to people is mislead them and let them think I'm having the time of my goddamn life when I'm in pain. Don't you look at me with that smug look. You make me sick. A man of integrity, I ought to smack you. And Mankind attacks with the mandible claw. Off-screen voice. "Jimmy, Jimmy, Jimmy, can we get some help? He's gonna need some help." The response to the interview was overwhelming. It was shown in 4 segments, and each week I could feel the momentum growing. The interviews were never intended to make me a good guy, but the pieces came off so well that I started being cheered. Every week the reaction grew to the point where I was soon one of the most loved wrestlers in the company. I should point out now that it wasn't simply the interview that made the piece so successful, it was the presentation as well. Chris Chambers produced the specials and did a phenomenal job of weaving childhood photos, the infamous Dude Love video, and even Japanese deathmatch footage into the story. Dave Sahadi and Doug LeBeau are two other extremely talented producers that the World Wrestling Federation is lucky to have. As a former television production student, I am well aware of their importance to what we do, as without them, we might very well look like fat guys in their underwear pretending to fight. Perhaps the biggest star of the entire interview series was my fantasy creation of Dude Love. I began receiving letters from fans about my dude dream, that had inspired them to follow theirs, and there was even a small contingent of Dude Love signs in the arena. I was surprised one evening to hear Bruce Pritchard say, "You know, we're going to make a Dude Love shirt," and I was literally shocked when Vince later proposed a radical idea. "Mick, for one night only, somewhere in the future, we're going to have a Dude Love match on pay-per-view." I could not believe it. Dude Love in the World Wrestling Federation. Oh, have mercy. My contract negotiation had also gone well. It didn't make me rich, but it certainly provided security for my family, and if invested wisely, the money could make me wealthy over time. I was able to have several advantageous conditions worked in, and my final deal was considerably more lucrative than the one offered a year earlier. With the contract talks behind me, I was now able to lie down at night, secure in the knowledge that I was making only slightly less than a second string shortstop hitting 187 for the Mariners. .187, whatever. It's an RBI figure. True to his word, however, Vince started putting the company's promotional power behind Mankind, and he seemed to explode in the summer of 1997, the summer of love. Coming off a tremendous final match at the King of the Ring, my feud with Hunter Hearst Helmsley was met with great enthusiasm around the country. Helmsley, better known now as Triple H, was a talented wrestler whose star was just starting to rise, and our battles throughout this summer were highlights of my career. I remember one specific match in Nassau Coliseum where I had both Hunter and China, his bodyguard, caught in the dreaded double mandible. The crowd was going crazy, and I couldn't control my emotions. "This is great!" I yelled with an enthusiasm more befitting a 13-year-old touching his first female breast. To further the emotional high, I saw Colette and the kids sitting in the stands as I started to exit through the curtain. I went back, picked up Noelle, and spun her in the air as the usually tough Nassau crowd softened up. I put her down and reached for Dewey, who screamed and ran as if I were a Disney character. Dewey was funny that way. He loves wrestling more than anything in the world, but for years was terrified of going to the matches. During my first year with the Federation, he had gone into such hysteria in Savannah, Georgia, that I had to dress in the kitchen. Later that summer in Bangor, Maine, with author Stephen King in attendance, he had actually watched the matches but covered his ears the entire time to drown out the noise. Stone Cold had spotted the little guy in the stands and smiled. "They've been covering his ears this entire time?" he asked. "Well, I'll accept your match," I answered back. Then he covered his nose. Now it's a different story, as Dewey surveys the action and expertly offers theories and predictions on all the mat action. And most of the time, his theories and predictions are right on the money. Mankind merchandise was starting to move as well. I had worn the yellow Mankind Happy Face t-shirt on my Jim Ross interviews, and they immediately became a big hit. As a matter of fact, they trailed only Austin 316 as the company's best-selling shirt, but by a substantial margin. The Austin shirt was fast on its way to becoming the biggest selling piece of merchandise in wrestling history, so I didn't feel too bad about trailing him. At first, I'd look out and estimate the margin to be 2-1, then 3-1, 4-1, and so on, until the entire arena landscape was full of those things. The shirt was showing up everywhere, on football players, on rock stars, you name it. Austin 316 had become mainstream. I used to sit and wonder if any big stars might wear my shirt. That would be a big thrill. One day I was looking through some underground thrash metal magazine that a fan had given me. All of a sudden, there it was. A musician was on stage with a Wanted Dead Cactus Jack t-shirt. Man, it felt good. It didn't matter that I didn't know the guy's name or wasn't a fan of his type of music. What mattered was that he thought enough of me to wear my likeness in front of his crowd. I was damn proud because it seemed to be an affirmation of everything I'd ever worked so hard to achieve. Then I looked closer. The musician had his penis pulled out and was stroking it on stage. My pride shriveled like George Costanza's member after a dip in a cold pool. I haven't seen one of my shirts in a photograph since, and to tell you the truth, I don't want to. I'm afraid. At this point, Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels had been building up to a rematch of the 1996 WrestleMania that was expected to draw a huge audience. In July of 1997, they had their first fight. It didn't do a big pay-per-view rate or TV rating because, in fact, it wasn't a televised event. Strangely, it didn't have a big audience either. In fact, it was only seen by a few people. After 16 months of anticipation, the big match between Shawn and Bret was a real-life fight in the dressing room. The two, who didn't care for each other to begin with, had been doing a series of shoot interviews where they revealed their true feelings about one another. In these, they verbally tore each other apart, and as a result, genuine aggression had developed. Shawn lost his interest as a result of the backstage beating, leaving a huge void in the Federation's plans. Not only was the potentially lucrative Hart Michaels match ruined, but the tag team scene was in shambles as well. Michaels and Stone Cold had been tag team champs, and now General Vince and his lieutenants had to think up another battle plan. I was their secret weapon. Mankind began petitioning Steve to be his partner, while Steve started a campaign of his own to keep the one-eyed weirdo away from him. I began wearing a big sign reading, "Pick me, Steve," and taking unbelievable punishment to impress the Texas Rattlesnake. Finally, after I saved him from a Heart Foundation beating, Steve seemed to lighten up. He called me into the ring and accepted the hand of friendship, which I gladly accepted. Steve then grabbed the mic and, in a departure from his badass persona, let his sensitive side shine forth. "Mankind, a handshake just ain't good enough." Then the big bald bastard put out his arms for a mankind hug. Hell, I'm a good hugger, so I embraced the toughest SOB in the World Wrestling Federation. Then, in an act of treachery so great it had Benedict Arnold and Judas Iscariot shaking their heads in disbelief, Austin turned on me. He booted me in the stomach, hit me with his Stone Cold Stunner, and even gave me double middle fingers as I lay there in my anger and my shame. This was the kind of thing that could send mankind over the edge. A few days later, I received a surprise phone call from Vince. His booming voice wasted no time in making his point. "Hey, pal, how would you like to be Dude Love?" I didn't know what to say, as his question had caught me completely off guard. "You mean for the next pay-per-view?" I finally managed to squeak out after remembering Vince's previous idea. "No," Vince boomed back. "I'm talking about from now on." I gulped and actually felt my body going weak at the prospect of the dude gracing the sacred World Wrestling Federation ring. "Vince, are you sure? I mean, Mankind's going so well." Vince was adamant, but his voice was softer, actually soothing. "Mick, I'm not saying we can't ever go back to Mankind, but I just love the whole Dude Love story, and I know our fans will love it too. It's such a great PR story. Regis and Kathy Lee would love something like this." Vince had made me see his vision. I was smiling brightly as I said, "You really think so?" Which was kind of like saying, "Put me over just a little more." Vince was happy to oblige. "Mick, the way I see it, Dude Love is going to be huge. Children will love him, the fans who already love Mankind will love him, and guys won't be afraid to bring their girlfriends to the matches because the dude won't threaten them. He'll be a safe sex symbol." I was sold now, but just wanted a little more information. Vince was quick to please. "We'll play it up huge. Girls, pyro, we're even going to bring you up with Steve." The summer of love was about to begin. I walked into the Freeman Coliseum in San Antonio, Texas in July of 1997 and heard an unusual retro disco beat booming over the loudspeakers. Vince was right there. "Congratulations, dude. This is your new music." I had to admit, I liked it. I even learned the emotionally touching lyrics and began singing them throughout the day. Hell, I even caught that old softy Jim the Anvil Neidhart singing them one time also. It is a pretty good banger. Uh, it just says "dude love, dude love, dude love, dude love, dude love, dude love, baby, dude love," which to be fair are the words, but there's a little bit more to it than that. Believe it or not, I have a platinum album in the closet for Dude Love on the World Wrestling Federation, the Music Volume 3 CD, even though I didn't sing it, write it, or play it. Next events actually try to teach me how to walk with rhythm. I had been doing the Mankind Stagger, the Cactus Jack Stumble, and the Mick Foley Limp for so long that I really didn't know how to strut like the hip cat that the dude was. After several tries, we finally pre-taped some footage of just the dude's white shoes strutting across the floor. The evening's Raw main event was to feature tag champs Bulldog and Owen against Austin and a mystery partner. Austin had been taped saying, "I don't need no damn partner," and was attempting to go it alone. Stone Cold was holding his own for the first few minutes, but the champs took over as the show started to go to commercial break. "Wait," Vince yelled over his play-by-play mic. "We've just been informed that Stone Cold Steve Austin's partner has just arrived." A drum track blared over the loudspeakers as the pre-taped footage of the dude's strutting shoes played to the crowd. Once back from the break, the beating continued until a strange figure suddenly appeared on the huge Titantron video screen. "Owl, Steve-O," the figure yelled. "Looks like you could use a little help, like maybe a tag team partner." At this point, the action in the ring stopped, and all the men stared in disbelief at this guy on the screen. He was dressed in a tie-dyed shirt and bandana and looked to be the figure of cool, even if his mirrored shades were slipping due to the lack of an ear to support them. The cool guy continued his mesmerizing jive talk by yelling, "Now, Steve-O, I don't blame you for not wanting to team with that scraggy-looking Mankind, but you never said nothing about teaming with the hippest cat in the land. Yo, Steve-O, it's me, Dude Love, and I'm coming to save the day. Ow, have mercy." The crowd roared at the mention of the dude and roared even louder when the dude came strutting down the ramp. All three guys in the ring were great at expressing their shock, with Austin in particular looking like he was looking at the biggest dork in the land. Before the dude could get to the ring, however, the champions jumped Austin, and the dude had to wait anxiously in the neutral corner. Finally, the champ screwed up just enough to allow Austin to tag the dude. The loved one was a house on fire as he tore into his adversaries with hokey chops and a variety of weak-looking offensive maneuvers. Finally, the dude saw his opening and caught Davy Boy with a tie-dyed mandible claw, which would briefly be known as the love handle. After this match, it was decided to leave the claw to Mankind in order to accentuate the disparity of the two characters. Davey struggled until Owen came off the top rope with a drop kick that floored the dude. While the ref was putting Owen out, Steve-O re-entered the fracas and caught Bulldog with a mighty Stone Cold Stunner, his patented finishing move. Davey went down and the referee turned around just in time to see the dude making the cover. 1, 2, 3, we had new champions. The place erupted as the strain of Dude Love, Baby had the crowd dancing in the aisles. Two paid models, oops, I meant two Dude Love groupies, couldn't take it anymore and hopped the guardrail so that they could get down and boogie with this safe sex symbol. Austin barged in and began dancing with us, showing his fellow Texans some intricate breakdancing moves not seen since that particular form of entertainment disappeared 10 years earlier. No, he didn't. But he did hand the dude a tag team belt and shake his hands before leaving the happy threesome to dance the show off the air. I was elated backstage. Vince had single-handedly made this dream come true. It didn't matter that the dude couldn't dance a lick or that his trunks were falling down to the point where he almost looked like the hippest plumber in the land. The dude was a breath of fresh air. As Vince himself put it, a week later after surveying fans' opinions, the dude makes people feel good about themselves. For a while that summer, I had a dual existence as Mankind and Dude Love, even to the point of appearing on the same show as both guys at different times. In a few matches with Triple H, I started the match as the dude, only to be beaten all the way up the aisle. While Helmsley celebrated, Mankind would suddenly emerge and continue the battle. Ironically, it was during a Mankind match with Helmsley that Dude Love would have his finest moments. SummerSlam took place in the Continental Meadowlands Arena on July 24th, 1997. Mankind was scheduled to take on Triple H in a steel cage match to settle their lingering feud. I had just returned from Santa's Village, New Hampshire, and as usual found that the combination of White Mountain's Christmas memories and harrowing trips down the Yule log flume had me ready for action. As a general rule, I tend to suck big time inside a cage, but this match was memorable. We went at it at a good pace for several minutes before Triple H took over. At one point, he rammed my head 10 unanswered times into the blue steel bars. Even though I tried to absorb the impact with my shoulder and chest, I could feel my noggin bouncing against the steel about half of the time and woke up the next morning with the lumps to prove it. Unfortunately, that would be far from my worst pain of the night. As things looked their worst for Mankind, China hurled a steel chair over the top of the cage and then climbed part way up the bars to shout encouragement. Hunter went for his patented pedigree, which, if successful, would have planted my head firmly on the steel chair. In reality, the pedigree was a great-looking move that did carry quite a bit of risk with it. I was able to sweep his legs to counter the move, and then, using my knees as a back type of fulcrum on his ass, was able to drop backward and slingshot him into the bars where China was standing. The treacherous twosome collided, and the pop was monumental, to the point of being almost Road Warrior-ish as China flew to the floor below. Victory was within my grasp. All I had to do was get through the door and touch the floor to be the winner. In this type of cage match, the winner is the first man to climb over the top or through the door and touch the ground. I began crawling for the door, but was well aware of what was waiting for me when I got there. At 200 muscled pounds, Joni Laurer was as strong as many of the men in the Federation, and actually stronger than the guy whose book you're reading. When she came to the company, many of the men had been hesitant to let a woman show them up, or as former Intercontinental Champion Ahmed Johnson had so eloquently put it, "Ain't gonna let no bitch hit me." Apparently, I was a little more secure in my manhood, and as a result had been power slammed, punched, kicked, suplexed, and ball shot by the ninth wonder of the world. None of that, however, could have prepared me for the pain that I was about to feel. As I stuck my head through the bars, China made her move. If anyone was at fault for what happened next, I was, because I made my head such a wide open target. China was merely swinging the door as hard as she could, which is how she knew I insisted on things being done. Maybe I should have tried what many believe is the whole idea behind wrestling anyway, faking it. Because the pain that I felt when China slammed the heavy steel bar door on my head was unbearable. I know that I mentioned earlier my torn abdominal muscle was my most painful injury, but this one was close. It hurt so bad that I didn't even hold my head. I held my shoulder. Pain was shooting all the way down my arm, and I still lay still for several moments. At first, I thought there was no way I could continue, but then I sadly realized that this was SummerSlam, and I had one big move left in me. Somehow, as Triple H made his move, I was able to duck and catch him with a DDT on the steel chair. It was time for the past to look me directly in the eye. I got up and started to scale the cage. When I reached the apex, Hunter still had not moved. The match was all but over as I began to climb down to certain victory. The pop was deafening. So loud was it that I temporarily looked around to see if Hegstrand was there. I was literally 3 feet from victory when I was overcome by a memory of Madison Square Garden and Jimmy Snuka and the leap that changed my life. All of a sudden, my next move was clear. I was going to fly off the top of the cage. I stopped my downward descent and looked up. It seemed as if the crowd could read my mind. I took off my Mankind mask and threw it into the ring. I didn't need it anymore because I wasn't mankind anymore that night. I was Dude Love, and this continental arena had suddenly become Danny Zucker's backyard. With each step up the blue bars, the noise grew in volume. When I got to the top, the sound was louder than anything I'd been a part of. I tore open my shirt to reveal my old Dude Love red heart tattoo, flashed the Jimmy Snuka I love you sign, and sailed majestically into the New Jersey arena air. Wham! I landed hard on Hunter with an impact that jolted both of our bodies. It was at that point the greatest single moment in my career. I still had a match to win, though. After a few moments of basking in the adulation of the crowd, I crawled to the bars and started to climb. Sensing defeat, China had climbed in to help her man. As I climbed, she helped, and as she helped, I climbed, until it was a near dead heat to see who would reach the floor first, Hunter being dragged through the door, or the dude over the top. Just as things looked their worst, the dude snatched victory out of the jaws of defeat by dropping the last 5 feet to the floor. Hunter touched down a split second later, but the results were already in. The dude had won it. The match, however, had taken its toll on both men, and we lay momentarily motionless until the music played. Upon hearing the beat in the faux Bee Gees groove, it seemed as if the dude's boots had a life of their own. In a scene taken right from The Jerk, where Steve Martin's Navin Johnson learns he has rhythm, the dude's toes started tapping. His melody must have been infectious because soon his whole body was moving. Even though badly wounded from China's cranium-crushing cage concussion, the dude somehow summoned the guts, the pride, and the testicular fortitude to strut out of the Continental Arena. I described it as my mangled, twisted strut. Hunter later said it looked pretty much like my everyday walk. I've got to admit to taking some creative liberties with the story I have just written. In truth, the tattoo was almost invisible as it became smudged during their match, and I was so afraid of falling when I got to the top that I actually flew from the bar one below the top. The rest of the description is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me, dude. Unfortunately, later that same evening, Steve Austin was badly injured as a result of a ring accident with Owen Hart. The move, an inverted piledriver, saw Austin land squarely on his head and left him unable to move for the next few minutes. It was a truly scary moment that put Austin out of action for several months, but that ironically helped his career reach even greater heights. My own injury from the cage door would affect my neck for several months, but obviously not enough to the extent that Austin's injury affected him. The next evening, the dude squared off with Owen for a match that was memorable mainly for the arrival of the dudettes to congratulate their man on a hard-fought victory. Actually, the dudettes in this case were our seamstress Julie and a hot chick named Colette, who also happens to be my lovely wife. Given her moment in the spotlight, things very nearly got X-rated, as my wife clearly appeared to be attacking her somewhat embarrassed man on national television. But hey, what the hell, after being alone with the kids 250 days a year, she deserved a little release. Also, I need to correct a misconception. After the airing of the match, a story circulated that I was actively trying to secure a role for my wife with the company. Actually, the truth is a little tamer. She and the kids had been traveling with me since our Santa's Village vacation. She was asked by one of the agents if she wanted to be on television that night, and she said sure. We both had fun, and I thought my wife looked truly beautiful on the screen. With Austin out, the dude embarked on a brutal tour of revenge with Owen Hart. Actually, it may have been brutal, but that was mostly on the fans who had to watch them. I myself was about to heal my body and had a great time taking part in some of Owen Hart's classic bad matches. As already mentioned, the love handle was taken away from the dude to clearly set him apart from mankind. I began to establish or think about what other lengths I could go to establish this character. I decided to make the dude somewhat less imposing than mankind. Gone was the aggression and tenacity, to be replaced instead by some of the worst looking offense this side of Baron Cicluna. Weak chops replaced stiff forearms, and on the speaking side of things, mankind's deranged philosophical shriekings yielded to worn out 70s cliches. In many ways, I just ripped off Diamond Dallas Page, if not in word, then at least in spirit. I also took a look at the World Wrestling Federation roster and saw that it was filled with legitimate tough guys. The dude I decided needed to be the antithesis of tough. He had the market cornered on Goofy and took full advantage. And everything the dude took part in, from his so bad it was good entrance video to developing the worst finish in the history of the business, the dude embodied nerdiness and nincompoopery. The fans loved it. In the bitter feud with the two-time Slammy Award-winning Hart, the dude was not afraid to get in touch with his cowardly side either. Unlike other wrestlers, especially Mankind, who were stoic and heroic when it came to absorbing punishment, the dude was not shy in admitting how little he cared for even the slightest bit of bodily harm. A match in Washington, D.C. at the end of August stood out as special for a few reasons. First, it was the advent of the microphone cell spot. I was on a house mic shucking and jiving with the Capital City fans when the devious Hart jumped me from behind with absolutely no provocation. With microphone in hand, I strayed from the standard wrestling protocol of macho grunts and groans and replaced them with cries of terror and pleas for mercy. "Oh, God! No, please! Oh, it hurts! Oh, the pain! The pain! Please stop! Oh God, you're killing me. The dude was really wimping out, but Owen made the mistake of turning his back and addressing his fans, or love children, as I like to call them. When he turned around, the dude had somehow found the will to continue. He went at Owen, and his Owen went, ooh ah, into the microphone. The dude then wrapped the microphone cable around his adversary's trachea and reared back on these deadly reins. All of a sudden, I heard a voice over the public address system. It was Owen at his hocus. I can't breathe. I had to cover my face to keep from laughing. After several more dreadful minutes that would have had Bill Watts turning blue, Owen slipped up and the dude took full advantage. Dude went to a corner and a la Shawn Michaels began stomping his foot. This stomp usually signaled that Michaels' trademark Finnish sweet chin music was on tap. Sweet chin music was a devastating sidekick to the jaw that helped Shawn become one of the most popular players in the game. The crowd knew, however, that what the dude had on tap was even more devastating. As Owen turned, the dude stopped stomping and instead swooped in for the kill like a toothless, one-eared, 300-pound bird of prey. The kick was devastating not so much for its power but for its precision, as the point of contact was made exactly 3 3/8 inches above the ankle bone. Sweet chin music had just rocked the DC crowd. Owen gamely hobbled around, but it was too late. The double underhooked him for the DDT and the 1-2-3. As was the custom, the dude did not celebrate a match without a young lady at his side. The young dudette who walked down the aisle certainly was a picture of loveliness in her flowered dress and pink bonnet that she had just bought in the Pennsylvania Dutch country. When she was helped into the ring, her eyes were as wide as if she were Cindy Brady with the red light turned on during the quiz show episode. It's okay, Peanut, I calmly assured my daughter as Dude Love, Baby played to the crowd. Just do what Daddy does. She then proceeded to imitate my every move, but in a way that was far more graceful than anything I could ever do. When I picked her up and carried her out of the ring and up the aisle, the crowd was applauding warmly. Every face I saw had a smile on it. The dude may have stunk in the ring, but Vince had been right about one thing. He did make people feel good about themselves. The Owen Classics continued for the next few weeks, but with the added bonus of the still injured Austin being in Dude's corner for the match. With Stone Cold at ringside, Owen and I had only one objective: to make Austin break character. If he laughed, our match was successful. If he did not, it wasn't. There was no other factor to determine victory. We especially knew that we hit pay dirt if we saw him with his head buried in his arm and his body shaking. One night in San Jose, we were mildly concerned about our little stinkathon of a match. Dave Meltzer, who wrote the Wrestling Observer newsletter, was in the crowd, and we knew he'd severely blister our effort whether Austin laughed or not. Fun was one thing, but getting ripped to shreds in the underground sheets was another. I approached Owen with my concern. Do you think maybe we should be a little more serious, seeing as Meltzer's out there? I asked. Owen considered it and gave in. Sure, Jack. We'll just have a regular match. I went to my dressing room and immediately felt weak in the stomach. Something was definitely wrong. After a few minutes of pondering and soul searching, I realized what it was. I felt as if a whole choir of ECW fans were shouting in my ear, "You sold out! You sold out!" Damn it, I thought. I'm the dude. I'm supposed to suck. Not only was it expected and gladly accepted, but as Bill Alfonso might have said, it's his constitutional right to stink up the building if he so desires. I immediately sought out Owen and confessed my sin to him. Just admitting it seemed to help us both. Without a word, we went our separate ways to search out ludicrous and completely harmless foreign objects to litter the ring with. When I returned, I had a whole mini dumpster full of stuff that even my son would have had a hard time selling. There was only one borderline dangerous weapon, and out of respect for my opponent, I brought up the sensitive subject matter. Owen, I began, not quite sure how to feel him out for this. Would you mind if I hit you with a bag of popcorn? With my hands, I pantomimed a circle about the size of a basketball. He didn't even pause to think of his own well-being before answering, "Sure, Jack. Just not too hard." After a few minutes of action so lame it would be hard for the written word to do justice to it, I dug deep into the inner confines of the dumpster for my secret weapon. I pulled out my supply of the popped kernels, and it was soon apparent that I'd taken advantage of my opponent's trust in me. For in my hands was a bag of popcorn that was somewhat larger than a basketball. In fact, it was a hefty cinch sack filled to the brim with the dangerous snack. I'm sure that in Owen's eyes, it must have looked like a tie-dyed Grinch on the top of Mount Crumpet. Up went the bag and down it came with so much force that I resembled a pimply-faced 15-year-old trying to ring a bell with his hammer so he could impress his skanky girlfriend with a cheap-ass stuffed animal at the local carnival. The impact buckled Owen's knees, but he gamely continued until the blow wore him down and he collapsed in a pile of the salty snack food. I should have stayed on him, but I couldn't resist the urge to showboat, so I stuffed a handful of the coin into my mouth and turned to give the San Jose faithful a glimpse of the dude's 23 skidoo knock-kneed love dance. When I returned, Owen was ready and caught me with a boot and a series of wheat chops and kicks to my buttocks area that sent me down in the middle of the corn, which by now was strewn about the ring. As he put the boots to me, I lay on my stomach and simultaneously waved my arms overhead and kicked my feet from side to side. When I got up, there was a huge popcorn angel in the ring where I had lain. I looked at Austin. He was trying to cover his face, but I could see his stomach shaking and tears rolling down his face. "You two are the shits," was all he could manage to say. That analysis from the Texas Rattlesnake was worth more than any number of stars the Wrestling Observer could have possibly given us.